Hello everyone. I'm glad to see you on my channel. The story I'm going to tell you today is pure. It is true that all the bad things that happen in life happen for a reason. It is said that we can appreciate the good things, the things when they happen to us. I hope you enjoy this story. I wish you a pleasant viewing experience.
When Caroline came to pick up her daughter at the daycare center, she froze when she saw an exact replica of her missing son, and running up to him ... in P4. The frowning sky illuminated the room with its whiteness when a young girl, who looked to be about 25 years old, opened the thick blue curtains. Instantly the room became alive, filled with the pleasant atmosphere of the morning. A happy smile shone on her face. "Adrien, get up," she said affectionately, and the boy of about 5, who was lying in his cot, rose unhappily and awkwardly wiped his eyes. "Mum," he mumbled in a thin, childish voice, "5 more minutes." "Not 5 more minutes. Come on, get up. I'm going to wake Ariel up again. Daddy's taking you to daycare. Is that where you sleep during quiet time? Come on, get up." Caroline, the young mother's name, decided to wake up her children Adrien and Ariel early today. Their father, Benjamin Willis, was also awake and ready to take the kids to kindergarten. All that was left was to wake them up and get them ready. The children of the young family have always been obedient, well-mannered, and disciplined. Adrien, who had just turned 5 2 months ago, was smart and quiet. He almost always obeyed his mom and dad unconditionally, because they were always explaining to the children that they only wanted the best for them. In his 5 years, he could realize that his parents had lived longer than he had, and that listening to them was very important to himself. His little sister Ariel, who was about to turn 4, didn't realize this yet, but she loved her big brother very much and looked up to him, and tried to learn this trait from him. She did not understand why she had to get up so early, or why she had to eat porridge for breakfast. But when she saw her brother doing these things without further ado, she repeated after him. But as it usually happens, sometimes even the most solid and well-established mechanisms failed. And this morning, for some reason, Adrien couldn't get out of bed. "Come on, I'll give you 5 minutes to wake up," Caroline commanded with a smile and, leaving the room, added, "I'm going to go wake Ariel up." Caroline and Benjamin tried to raise their children to be disciplined, but never succumbed to that very parental dictatorship. They tried to talk to their children as equals and prove to them the usefulness of their advice, not by birching or standing in the corner, but by words. But they did not give full freedom to choose whether to obey their parents or not. If a child refused to obey, which rarely happened, they would give him an explanatory talk. When Caroline entered the room, she opened the thick curtains, which were pink in her daughter's room, and tapped her on the shoulder. "Daughter, get up. It's time for daycare," she said. Ariel immediately opened her eyes and looked at her mum sleepily. "Is Adrien up?" she asked in a voice that was even thinner than Adrien's own. "Yes, he's awake," Caroline said softly and smiled. "You wake up too, and Daddy will take you to daycare." Ariel obeyed and immediately got up on the bed, wiping her sleepy eyes. The children slept separately from each other and from their parents. And when her daughter then left her room for the living room, and the door to her son's room wasn't even ajar, Caroline suspected something. She went into Adrien's room again. "Adrien," she tapped him lightly on the shoulder, "wake up. Daddy is already waiting for you." The son lifted his head on the bed, barely opening his eyes, looked at his mum, and asked in a very sleepy voice, "Has it been 5 minutes already?" "Well, it's been 10, Caroline exclaimed, and stepped away from the bed. Sighing heavily, the 5-year-old boy sat up on the bed. "I'm really sleepy," he said. "I haven't had a good night's sleep." "You'll sleep through the quiet hour at daycare," Caroline said. "Come on, Ariel's awake." Caroline made sure her son got out of bed and left his room. Then she helped her daughter to wash and brush her teeth, dressed her, helped her son to get dressed, and they left the flat as a friendly group. Benjamin Willis's family lived on the 4th floor, and the relatively long walk down the stairs helped Adrien cheer up. Once outside, they almost stepped into a puddle from the heavy rain of the night before. The old flat canopy over the entrance was visibly damaged. It had been broken by local hooligans a couple of years ago, and every autumn the residents of this entrance felt the consequences of their drunken misdemeanor. And time is not spared it. In the courtyard of the house, right in front of the entrance, there was already a car in which Benjamin was sitting. "Will you run to the car yourself?" Caroline asked, smiling. She bent down to the children. "Mum, there's still a puddle here," Ariel said in a low voice. "Okay," the young mum grinned and took the kids by the hands and walked them to the car. "Are you ready?" Dad asked as Adrien and Ariel got into the car. "Did you get everything?" "Yes, we're ready," they said almost in unison. "Well, let's go," Benjamin exclaimed with a childlike enthusiasm. Then he turned to the window, rolled down the glass and said to his wife, "I'll try not to be long." "Good," Caroline replied quietly. She smiled and watched the car with her favorite people drive away from their yard. Caroline quickly walked back into the driveway, fearing that it might start to rain. On the right side of the sky, huge black clouds covered the sky. They were moving in their direction. Caroline had a busy day ahead of her. She had written to her boss, Mr. Carl, yesterday that she was planning to take some time off today. The boss didn't object and kindly gave one of his best employees the day off. Caroline worked as the lead designer for a home improvement company in their town. She selected wall colors, furniture, and generally her job was to offer the finished interior of the flat according to the client's conditions. Caroline was always conscientious in her work, often going over her allotted hours, and Mr. Carl appreciated her very much. But today the girl had another task to put her own place in order. After all, 2 children, one of the reasons for the constant clutter in the flat. She did not always have time to clean up the toys scattered around the house at once, putting it off for the next day. Yesterday, Benjamin came home from work with a bus-like children's tent, and instantly the living room felt like a bomb of children's toys had exploded. Sure, Caroline could clean up and not slack off. But in addition to cleaning the house, she had to see her mother-in-law for the first time in years. She was flying in to visit them today, and had to be picked up from the airport in the afternoon. She had lived in Belarus for a long time, and had not contacted her son or his family at all for several years. Today was to be the first time she would see her grandchildren, but the first meeting with her grandchildren should be in a clean flat, Caroline thought as she walked back into the house. It was 4 hours before her mother-in-law was due to arrive, and she had plenty of time to clean up. Once inside the flat, she decided to grab a quick bite to eat and then tackle the task at hand. The living room was combined with the kitchen, so she had to have breakfast in the company of colorful Barbie dolls, Transformers, and other representatives of the toy world. Caroline started to put things in order as soon as she had breakfast, and she didn't hesitate. First of all, she had to sort the toys, the ones Adrien played with, into his room and her daughter's toys into her room. It was not an easy task because both her son and daughter had a lot of toys, and it was difficult to remember which one was which. She could have asked the children to put the toys away themselves, which she usually did. But this time, when they were content to go to sleep one by one, she decided to make an indulgence and clean up after them herself. Caroline decided to let the children rest, and Benjamin supported her in this. All of Ariel's dolls, all of Adrien's Transformers, Caroline thought, and sat down on the terry gray rug she had picked up herself and began to scatter these children's toys into 2 different piles. In the background, she switched on the television hanging on the wall in front of the sofa and, listening to some morning news of world events, unwittingly became absorbed in thinking about the day ahead. Caroline, having delved little into the biography of her husband of 27 years, it somehow did not particularly bother her, and she was quite satisfied with what she knew about him rather superficially. She knew that he had been brought up in a broken home because his father, a brave and valiant fireman, had been killed while fighting one of the fires. His mother, Mrs. Gwyneth, had brought him up quite strictly, which was why he was such an exemplary father who never scolded his children. He wanted to protect them from the kind of upbringing he had received. Benjamin learnt to be a locksmith and now worked in a rather prestigious company in the city. Then, when the guy turned 20, something happened to his mother and she started calling her son endlessly. There were calls of completely different content and reasons from son. "How are you doing?" to "I can't find my slippers." Benjamin persuaded her to get tested, and afterwards she assured her son that she had chronic fatigue. He didn't really understand the relationship between this diagnosis and her problems, which she reported to him every time she called, but he accepted the fact and began to devote more time to the already elderly woman. By then, he and Caroline had met, and she understood. She supported him in this, saying that if she had to help him, she was ready to help him. Benjamin started visiting her more often, talking to her on the phone more and more. 6 months had passed since Mrs. Gwyneth had announced her diagnosis to her son, and she had decided that she needed to go on holiday. She was already retired. She informed her son that she was going to Canada to visit some old friend. Benjamin didn't remember her specifying exactly who or where she was going for an unknown period of time and just disappeared. Any attempts to call her or contact her in any way were fruitless. Benjamin thought that their operator was out of service in Canada, or Mrs. Gwyneth had simply changed her SIM card to a Canadian one, and concluded that he would not disturb his mother's rest. If it was really that important to her, he made the decision to leave her alone. That was all Caroline knew. Until recently, her mother-in-law had made no sign of her at all. Benjamin hadn't bothered much about it either, saying that his mum had probably just decided to go into recluse. Her supposed life in Canada or elsewhere was of little interest to the man because he was focused on himself and his family. Just a week before that day, his son's phone had received a call from an obscure number. Benjamin was not in the habit of not receiving calls from unknown numbers, so he didn't hesitate to answer. "Hello, this is Benjamin Willis," said a husky female voice. "Hello, this is Benjamin Willis. Who's calling?" The man was always careful when talking to strangers on the phone. Tried never to say the word yes. "It's your mum," Benjamin, the woman said quietly, and then fell silent. "Mum, is that you?" Benjamin immediately fidgeted and rejoiced. "How are you?" "Where are you, Mum?" "Son, I'll be flying back soon. I'm sick of Canada. I want to go home. Tell me, have you and the baby moved?" "We did, Mum. But we're still in the same town. Mum's been somewhere all this time." "I'll fly back, son, and we'll talk then." "Then I'll keep this number. We'll call again." "I'm going to bed now, son. Good night." The phone rang 3 short beeps. The very conversation with his mother, with whom Benjamin had had no contact for 7 years, seemed painfully strange to him. She expressed no emotion, nothing that would indicate that his mother missed him. The impression was that she wasn't saying it, but reading from a piece of paper. Undoubtedly, the emotions in Benjamin's body took over, and he was unable to think straight. At this moment, he was very relieved that his mum was all right, and that she would even return to them soon. But something in both the woman's voice and the conversation itself made him wonder. He immediately told Caroline, who was reading Ariel a bedtime story. And she, too, rejoiced. They began to prepare themselves for the relatives' arrival, and also to prepare the children for the fact that they would soon meet their grandmother. Caroline had no parents. She spent her entire childhood in an orphanage. As soon as she turned 18, the state gave her a flat. For some time, the couple lived in it. And then, as soon as there was a mutual desire to have children, they sold this small living space and bought a larger flat to equip each planned child with a room. And for these children, the first meeting with their only grandmother was to go well. So Adrien and Ariel were immediately aware that they would soon have a new relative in their lives. Half an hour later, the living room floor had been completely cleaned and there was nothing extra left on it. All the toys had been successfully distributed to the rooms. It remained to mop the floors where there was a carpet and vacuum and dust all the shelves. It was not a difficult task, and Caroline planned to do it in an hour and a half. She decided to clean the floors last, just before she left for the airport. For now, she expected to vacuum where needed and dust all the shelves in the house. While waiting for Benjamin to return from kindergarten, her husband didn't wait long and returned without the children an hour after she had left with them. "Hi," said Caroline, wiping the dust, took the kids. "Is everything okay?" "Hi." "Yeah," Benjamin answered as he took off his jacket and walked into the living room. "I took the kids. They can't wait to meet their grandmother," she said with a small grin. "Who can't wait?" Benjamin smiled. "You know, I can't figure out if there's something wrong with her. Maybe I've forgotten what she's supposed to be like. But I think she's changed a lot in the last 7 years. I talked to her on the phone and I don't recognize her." "You've answered your own question," Caroline said. "You've just forgotten her. You haven't seen or heard from her in 7 years? Benjamin, you're just used to it." "I hope so," Benjamin said and sat down on the couch. He looked at the electronic wristwatch, which didn't activate at first, shook his hand a little and looked at the time. "We should be leaving in an hour and a half to 2 hours," he said. "Yes, to be on time. It's not raining outside." Caroline turned round and took off the gloves she'd been using to clean the flat. Not now, but it looked like it was going to. Caroline looked at her husband, who at that moment was thinking hard about something and looking at one point. "You look worried," she said, and sat down on the sofa next to Benjamin. He turned and looked at her for a second. Then, as if returning from the world of thought to the world of reality, he changed his expression. "I can't get that conversation out of my head," he said grudgingly. "I can't fucking figure out what happened to her. Just replaced a person." "Benjamin," Caroline said calmly, "you haven't seen each other in 7 years. There's a lot of things you could have overlooked, put out of your mind. You could have just forgotten her behavior." "No, Caroline, she wasn't like that. She was a, iron woman, but she always had feelings and emotions. She wasn't that insensitive. She just rang me up, said she'd be here soon. She said she was going to bed, and that was it. Nothing else. It's not like we haven't seen each other in 7 years, but in 2 days," Benjamin said unhappily. "Well, yes, it's really strange," replied his wife. "But I think that when you don't talk to your son for 7 years and you don't even know if you're calling him, it's not normal, but I think that's what happens. So just get it out of your head. We're going to meet her today and we're going to ask her about everything. How she's been living, where she's been living, what's wrong with her, and how's her health, and whether she's been able to overcome her." "What was her diagnosis? I can't remember." "Chronic fatigue." Benjamin scratched the back of his head. "I think she did. 7 years off is more than she's entitled to. I'm sure it is." The girl tried to support her husband in every possible way and tried to explain to him that a man could change a lot in 7 years. She sincerely believed it. She thought that Mrs. Gwyneth was fine, and she decided to check on her children. Benjamin had already told her that he and Caroline themselves already had children, and that she would meet her grandson and granddaughter on her arrival. It didn't take long for the grandmother to react. She immediately started shouting into the tube about how happy she would be to meet the kids. The time came when it was time to check out. Half an hour before, Caroline had thoroughly cleaned the floors of the flat, thus preparing the room to receive her dear guest. Already in the car, when the family was on their way to the airport, the girl was seized with excitement. She abruptly distracted herself from watching the buildings flashing in the window and turned to her husband, who was driving. "Listen," she said. "By the way, I didn't understand. Where is the mother-in-law going to live? The first night she, of course, will sleep over at our place. But beyond that?" The man frowned. "I don't know. Caroline, we'll see." Benjamin frowned. "She sold her flat then." "Did she?" Caroline asked anxiously. She suddenly felt the weight of her mother-in-law's impending arrival. She had not asked where Mrs. Gwyneth was going to live. She had asked about the flat, not because she really didn't remember it, but because she hoped that her husband didn't particularly want his mother-in-law to be in their flat all the time either. But it wouldn't last forever, would it? And her plans were unknown. Would she be coming for a long time or forever? The anxiety was based on the fact that Caroline did not know her mother-in-law and how she would behave towards her grown-up family, her grandchildren, and even towards the girl herself she could not even guess. The only thing that was clear was that she was very happy that she had grandchildren. Everything else in Mrs. Gwyneth's intentions and mood was unknown. "Yes," she has said, her husband calmly. "How long is she coming back for?" "Forever." "Forever," Caroline exclaimed desperately, looking at Benjamin pitifully. The girl's mood had changed dramatically in the last few hours. She was still ready to support her husband in this awkward and very exciting situation, when both son and mother were actually separated. But she was now not at all willing to let this meeting drag on, and the meeting, she believed, would drag on. It was a standard pattern that Caroline had heard about from various melodramas, magazines, and articles. An elderly mother who simply gets bored sitting alone in retirement, moves in with her son's family on any pretext, and eventually begins to terrorize her daughter-in-law. And if this situation in Benjamin's family began to develop in this way, Caroline, as she now reasoned, could go to very radical measures. An open scandal with her mother-in-law in front of the children, no questions asked. All for the sake of a brighter future. A scandal with her husband, same thing. The worst of all, as has been said, was the fact that Caroline hardly knew Mrs. Gwyneth. She only vaguely remembered her from the days when she and Benjamin had first started dating. And then her lover's mother had gone to Belarus. And nothing. Who had she become in the meantime? Somehow, in Caroline's imagination, she was an overbearing and rigid woman who sought to subjugate everything she saw. Some oppressive element loomed on the horizon of family harmony. And if she began to re-educate the children, it would be the worst act she could commit in the young girl's imagination. The backlash in such a case would not be long in coming. And then the always fair and kind, loving mum in the eyes of Adrien and Ariel would turn into a warrior knight who protects them from an unexpected attack. After all, accustoming a child to himself is a very simple task. It is worth a couple of times to take him to the cinema to some boring cartoon, buy him a few toys, and that's it. The child is under your complete control. In short, Caroline should have looked very carefully at her mother-in-law. She entertained hopes that she was very much mistaken. And in just an hour or two, she would meet not such an overbearing and uncompromising woman, which she imagined, but a genuinely kind and caring grandmother who appreciates her daughter-in-law, her work, and in no way will not interfere in the internal affairs of the family. "Do you have a piece of paper and a marker?" Caroline asked when they had reached the airport. "Yes, I did," Benjamin answered. "Look in the glove compartment, I put it there." Caroline opened the glove compartment and took out a plain white sheet of paper and a black marker. "What do we write?" "Benjamin Willis's family," Caroline asked with a smile. Benjamin laughed too and said it was a good idea. Caroline put the piece of paper on the dashboard of the car, holding it with one hand while she opened the cap of the marker with the other. Caroline, in her beautiful handwriting, wrote the phrase she had just suggested, closed the cap, and put it back in the glove compartment. "All set?" she asked. "Ugh," exhaled the husband. "Ready. Let's go and meet her." The young people got out of the car and went into the airport building to meet Mrs. Gwyneth. Standing amidst the almost uninterrupted flow of arriving people with a leaflet on which the family name was written, Benjamin and Caroline peered ahead, glancing over the heads of the citizens in search of the relative they were looking for. The flight was the same one Mrs. Gwyneth had mentioned on the phone, and they were looking for her. How to recognize her among dozens, perhaps hundreds of other strange women was a mystery. Suddenly, in the midst of the crowd trying to get out of the airport, a hand with the exact same sheet of paper was raised above their heads, on which was written in some crooked handwriting, "Looking for Benjamin Willis." And the young couple realized at once in what direction they should push through the crowd. They hurried towards the raised hand, looking up every now and then so as not to stray from the route to the hand stretched to the sky. It wasn't long before they reached their destination. Caroline glanced at the woman holding the leaf. She saw a rather elderly woman with a wrinkled face and strands of gray hair peeking out from under her burgundy beret. She was dressed in the same burgundy coat and wore no makeup at all. With her free hand, she was rolling a small suitcase. When she saw the young people and read what was written on the leaflet Caroline held, her eyes widened, her wrinkles smoothed, her hand dropped down, and in her husky voice, barely audible in the noise of the crowd, she spoke. "Son, it's me, Mum." Mum Benjamin shouted, and in a burst of joy hugged his aged mother tightly. "Son, you're all grown up now," Mrs. Gwyneth said as she released her from his embrace. And this she turned to Caroline. "Is that you, Caroline, daughter?" "Yes, Mrs. Gwyneth. It's me," the girl replied shyly. "I remember you too. Very young and ambitious. Very active," Mrs. Gwyneth continued. "Wow, you're a beauty. I can tell you that. Yes, my son always chose the best." "What are we standing here for, Mum?" Benjamin asked cheerfully. "Let's go to our house. We'll show you our flat, and then we'll get to know each other tonight." He took his mum under his arm and they walked slowly towards the exit of the hall. Caroline walked a little behind and was actually quite detached from the conversation between her husband and mother-in-law. It was understandable they had not seen each other for 7 years, and all her son's attention, of course, was now riveted on Mrs. Gwyneth. And the girl did not hinder this at all. She was really happy for her husband. He was very happy now. They squeezed through the flurry of people and exited the airport building and headed for the car park where their car was parked. "Caroline, will you sit in the back?" Benjamin asked as they approached the car. "I missed my mum. Let her sit in the front with me." "Yes, okay, no problem," the girl answered and sat in the back without any negative emotions. The mother-in-law sat comfortably on the front seat while her son was putting the suitcase in the boot. The woman slowly turned back so that she could see her daughter-in-law and asked, "Caroline, how are you doing? Is Benjamin not hurting you? Is everything well with you?" "Yes, Mrs. Gwyneth, everything is fine. We live, we don't complain, we bring up our children. Everything's fine." "Well, that's good. The most important thing is that you're doing well." As they chatted, Benjamin got back behind the wheel. The car started and they drove home. "Mum, tell me about it," Benjamin said very emotionally. "Where have you been all this time? No calls from you, no messages." "I've been living somehow. It's all good, son. Hungary, it just felt great. I've settled there." "What Hungary?" Caroline interrupted. "You've been to Canada, haven't you?" "Yes, Mum. What Hungary?" Benjamin wondered. And Mrs. Gwyneth looked at her son with stunned eyes. "Hungary?" Mrs. Gwyneth asked again. "What Hungary?" At this point, Caroline began to realize, still very vaguely, that something was wrong with the woman. Her illness, the so-called chronic fatigue, had not disappeared, but seemed to have progressed during the whole time she had been away from her loved ones. And seeing her husband's attitude, she feared that he too would realize this and decide to leave her mother to live with them, so that nothing would happen to her and she would always be monitored. "Did you just say something about Hungary?" "Mum, it's not clear," said the son. "No, son, you're confused. I was living in Canada with this woman." "What was her name?" "A friend of mine from a long time ago. We had a good life. You wouldn't believe it, it was like we'd been together for 7 years. "What 7 years did you break up with her for, Mum? I don't get it at all. What are you talking about?" Benjamin was clearly deluded and didn't understand a thing. "But you and I haven't seen each other for 7 years, son. Or have you forgotten?" "No, Mum. You just said you and your friend haven't seen each other in 7 years. And I don't understand that." "Oh yeah, well, I've been with my mate for 7 years, so to speak. I hope she'll come and visit me here too." Mrs. Gwyneth touched her forehead, as if remembering the name of that mysterious friend. "Lord, what was her name?" "Dorothy. Dorothy," she said. "Dorothy? Mrs. Gwyneth, did you take the pills they prescribed you?" "You know, for your chronic fatigue," Caroline asked. "I did. That's what Dorothy always said, don't refuse. Take what you're given, it was a saying or something nowadays." "Don't refuse what? What did they give you, Mum?" "I don't understand anything at all. What are you talking about?" Benjamin frowned, which meant he was either thinking hard or he didn't understand at all. "That's what Dorothy told me. She's a friend of mine from Canada. I haven't seen her in 7 years, son. Can you believe it? I hope she won't leave me here too." "Mrs. Gwyneth," said Caroline, rather loudly compared to the pensioner, "have you got those pills they prescribed you? Do you have them with you now?" "Yes, daughter, I have them in my suitcase. Dorothy gave them to me. She did." "Do you know why?" Dorothy said, "Well, you see, these pills, don't take them, or I'll stop talking to you," that's what she said. "She put the pills in there so I'd remember not to take them. That's it." "Mum, I don't understand anything at all," Benjamin said tensely. "Who is this friend? Do you have her number? Let me call her, we'll figure it out now. Who have you been living with all this time? This is outrageous." "I was living with a friend. From Canada." "What's her name?" "Dorothy." "That's right, I lived with her for 7 years. And now we're separated by that plane. I hope she'll visit me here. It'll be a pleasure. I had a good time with her. We were soulmates." Caroline looked at it all detachedly and did not take her mother-in-law's words seriously. It was understandable the old woman was talking nonsense, confused in her own testimony, and also repeated a lot. Her mind was obviously not all right. And for the girl, it could mean only one thing: Benjamin would want her mother to stay with them, and he'd have an ironclad argument for it. He's not stupid. He also realizes that his mother's head is in big trouble. And the worst of it was that Caroline had not a single argument against these arguments. When Benjamin and Caroline got home, the first thing they did was talk about how nice their flat was. "Look, Mum, Caroline chose all this stuff herself. She's a designer," the man said excitedly. "Mum, it's a nice renovation, isn't it?" "Yeah, guys, it's really nice." "Congratulations," Mrs. Gwyneth said hoarsely, looking round the hallway. "And that's just the entrance hall. Mum, let's go further in. You'll see the children's rooms, the living room and kitchen, our bedroom. Come on, Mum, get undressed." Benjamin helped his mother take off her coat and hang it on a secure hook in the hallway, and then slowly, holding her shoulder gently, led her forward. Caroline watched all this with great apprehension. She had seen her husband's mood and hoped very much that it was temporary, only a logical consequence of the 7-year gap between them. But still, the worry that the obviously ill mother-in-law would stay with them did not give the girl any rest. She was more worried not even about the fact that she herself would have to sacrifice her personal freedom and time for the sake of a man virtually unknown to her, but about the fact that all this will be watched by the growing children. That was her greatest fear. "Look, Mum, it's the living room," came her husband's voice from the back of the flat. And Caroline, catching herself thinking hard, took off her jacket and went inside. The drawing room, living room, as if the woman were trying to express delight, but she was not very good at it. "Dorothy, may I sit here?" "Dorothy, who, Mum?" Benjamin furrowed his eyebrows again. "Mum, your friend Dorothy stayed in Canada, where you've lived for the last 7 years. There's no Dorothy here, Mum, but there's Caroline and me." "Yes, Caroline?" Yes, Mrs. Gwyneth, don't you worry about Dorothy. She's fine, and she misses you in Canada." Aha, the pensioner looked at the girl with wide-open eyes and made an expression, as if she had just learned something that had been kept from her all her life. "Dorothy's in Canada, son," she duplicated to Benjamin. Toward evening, Benjamin went to pick up the children at daycare, leaving his wife and her mother alone. In the flat, the mother-in-law spent most of her time sitting in silence and watching television. It seemed that she was so deeply immersed in watching some incomprehensible series that she had completely forgotten where she was and who was around her. Though she may have forgotten that even before she started watching TV. Benjamin and the kids didn't take long to arrive and returned just 40 minutes after leaving. "Okay, guys," the young father said, turning back as they pulled up in front of the house. "Get ready. You're about to meet your grandmother." "Hooray!" shrieked the children and raised their little hands, tightly clenched into fists, upwards. Adrien was first in the hallway, followed quietly by Ariel, followed, of course, by Benjamin. Little Adrien had a look of anxiety on his face. He didn't know what to expect from his new relative, and Ariel didn't understand how to behave, so she repeated her brother's emotions. "Well, children, why are you going so slowly?" Benjamin said cheerfully. "Look, Grandma's watching TV. Come on, kids, let's get acquainted." But the children didn't want to obey. They cautiously approached the sofa where Grandma was sitting. Caroline, who was watching this picture from the living room kitchen, sitting at the table and reading something on her phone, immediately began to feel fear for the children. She was afraid that, because of the strange grandmother, they might get some psychological trauma. Mum, Benjamin said almost in a whisper, "Look who's here to see you." It was only then that Mrs. Gwyneth noticed the children coming towards her. "Oh," she exclaimed excitedly. But her hoarse voice made it sound more like a cry for help than joy. "My grandchildren have come." As quickly as possible, the old woman rose from the sofa and hurried to her suitcase, which Benjamin had placed next to the dresser in the living room. Now, boys, I brought you presents. My friend from the Czech Republic gave them to me. I haven't seen her in 7 years," said Mrs. Gwyneth. "You know what, kids? Oh, what toys she made. Good toys. She gave you presents when we were in Hungary with her. Now, darlings. Now I'll give you something." The children, not understanding, looked dazedly at how the pensioner, who was driving the brains of the pensioner, ineptly opened the suitcase. Adrien and Ariel's father looked on with eyes full of joy and delight. And on Caroline's face there were emotions of despair and fear. What is he doing to our children, she thought, just like that, literally in one day. From a sensible father, who was always concerned about the psychological stability of his children, who never allowed himself any antics in their presence, turned into an almost obsessive man. The feeling was that he too had gone head over heels like Mrs. Gwyneth herself. The pensioner, in her attempts to open the suitcase, dropped it and unzipped it halfway. Somehow she managed not to keep it in place, and it fell on its side. Instantly some papers fell out of it and got stuck under the fallen valise, and candy from a poorly tied cellophane bag scattered all over the floor. "Oh, Mom." "You dropped the suitcase," Benjamin fussed. "Be careful, please." "I'll pick it up." He bent down to retrieve some papers from under the suitcase, and the children, even though the candy had fallen out, still stood there in a kind of confusion. It was heartbreaking for Caroline to watch her children standing there, afraid of everything that was going on. At one point, her emotions just couldn't take it. She jumped up from her chair, walked over to the children, and taking their hands, said, "Okay, children, let's go. I'll read you a book of some kind now. Make up your minds. Do you want Adrien's room or Ariel's?" There was great tension in her voice. "Adriana," Adrien said, his R slurred. "Adriana," Ariel said. "Well, in Adrien's room, so in Adrien's room. Come on, guys. And Grandma's just so excited to meet you. I'm going to read you a story and then she's going to give you presents. Okay?" Caroline asked. "Yes," said the children. And Caroline went with them to her son's room. The door slammed shut behind them. Benjamin looked at it with some anger in his eyes. "These are my grandchildren," he said. "Son, have you met them yet?" "You know, son, Dorothy gave me some presents to give to my granddaughters. I can't find them. Can you believe it, son? Dorothy will soon introduce you to my granddaughters." "Don't worry," Benjamin replied hurriedly. "All right, Mum, let me help you pack." He bent down once more to retrieve the papers, and this time no one distracted him. Pulling out a few memorable pieces of paper, he turned them over face up, with something printed on them. "And this, son, is from a friend in Hungary," said Mrs. Gwyneth. "What's her name? Dorothy gave it to me, I think, and told me not to show it to anyone. Said keep it under 7 locks, but how am I supposed to keep it under lock and key when I'm supposed to meet my granddaughters? I haven't seen them in 7 years. They flew in from Canada. I'm a grandmother now, Benjamin. I already have granddaughters and Dorothy doesn't." "Why did Dorothy tell you not to show this to anyone?" Benjamin asked warily. "TA. Dorothy is a friend of mine from Canada," Mrs. Gwyneth explained. Benjamin sighed. He decided to familiarize himself with what his mother had told him he could never know. When he saw what was written on those papers, his mouth dropped open in a mute scream. His eyes widened to the size of 5-ruble coins. And his breathing quickened as if he had just run a 5-kilometer marathon without respite. "Tell me, what was that?" Benjamin asked, entering the bedroom when Caroline was already lying in bed under the covers, reading a novel by the dim light of the floor lamp. "What are you talking about?" The wife deliberately pretended not to know what her husband was talking about. "You know exactly what I mean," he replied. "Why did you take the children away when Mum wanted to give them presents?" Caroline was naturally torn inside by emotions that she wanted to spill out immediately. But she held them back so as not to cause a scandal. "Benjamin," Caroline called out. She put the book back on the nightstand. I can see how they're reacting to Mrs. Gwyneth. They didn't realize it was their grandmother at all. I think they just thought we'd brought home some random pensioner who's just chatting away. "What are you implying?" The man frowned. "Benjamin. Well, haven't you noticed?" Caroline spoke calmly, trying not to let a single gram of emotion into her words. "I can see that you've noticed it yourself. It's very hard not to. Your mom's talking a lot of incoherent nonsense. And I think, if you'll excuse me, that she has some kind of mental problem." Benjamin didn't say anything, but just sighed heavily and put his head down. "Okay, yes," he replied just as calmly. "When you took the kids into the room, I helped her gather the disintegrated items from the suitcase." He sighed again. "And you know, it's very unpleasant and probably even painful to say, but I saw the psychiatric discharge. What Caroline was genuinely surprised. How was she allowed on the plane alone? I've yet to find out. Her GP's name was Dorothy Morris, and Mum was actually in Canada the whole time. She was being treated at a neuropsychiatric hospital for it's hard for me to say this, schizophrenia. Yes, my mum has schizophrenia, and there's nothing I can do about it. I understand it was diagnosed 7 years ago. I honestly don't understand how they let her back and forth, especially on an aeroplane and on her own. And why was she even released? Like I said, I'll be looking into that. Oh my God, Caroline exclaimed. She knew her mother-in-law had a lot of problems, of course, but she hadn't realized that the diagnosis would be so dire. Yes, Benjamin confirmed with a tightening of his lower lip. It's not a good situation. What are you going to do? Find out why she was discharged in the first place, and secondly, why she was allowed on the plane alone. And thirdly, of course, support her. I'm going to do everything I can to keep her from losing her mind. I'll go and see a psychiatrist tomorrow. I'm not going to let this go. Did you make her a bed? Caroline asked worriedly. Yes, I made up the sofa in the living room. Apparently, we're going to have to squeeze in a bit more from now on. In a way, Caroline had already realized what Benjamin was getting at. It was a real stab in the back for her. She was not jealous, nor did she feel any anxiety about her husband's very abrupt attention to Mrs. Gwyneth, rather than to herself. But she was very much afraid for her children. To see such a thing at such a young age. An unprepared child's psyche could not bear it. Caroline Benjamin said to her, I really hope you understand. I'll tell you, I'm not leaving Mum. She's sick, and she's seriously ill. Putting her in some kind of dispensary or some kind of mental hospital. I just don't trust those doctors. But I trust myself, and I trust you, and I trust the kids. And I think that we all together can at least prevent this process from continuing. I really hope that we can at least keep this disease at the level that it is now. I don't think my mum is any kind of threat, but understand, I don't want to lose her again. So I'm really counting on your support and Ariel's support. But I insist that Mum lives with us. That night, Caroline slept very badly. Even though they hadn't had any scandals or open arguments with Benjamin, her nerves had been frayed the previous night. When her husband was snoring, she turned her head to the other side and realized that she had insomnia. She fidgeted in the bed in search of the most comfortable position, tried to force herself to fall asleep and not think about anything, but nothing to think about just did not work. She lay there planning what to do next. Her husband Benjamin was enveloped by the awakened love and care for his mother that he had not been able to enjoy for 7 years. She was well aware that this was normal before, but she also realized that this awakened feeling in him would continue for a long time to come. It could have a very disastrous effect on their relationship in the family. A flourishing harmony was out of the question now that she had thought through all the possible scenarios. After the arrival of her mother-in-law, she had never imagined that things would be so complicated and dangerous. Eventually, she did manage to doze off. Moral fatigue took over. She had a very strange dream. She was standing in the middle of an incomprehensible white room with absolutely nothing in it, just a dull white and incomprehensibly glowing space. She just stood in it, and it was as if she couldn't move. She was looking for something in this white room, but what? There was absolutely nothing here in empty space. Her torso felt as if it were restrained, but she kept looking in the monochrome room for something. Suddenly, she felt that she could move. She immediately began to search for something, but she didn't know what it was. She wandered around this white room, extremely anxious and unable to understand anything. Suddenly, she heard a child crying behind her. Her eyes widened, her body stiffened with incomprehensible fear, and she turned round. Behind her, she saw Adrien. He was running away so fast and fast that it seemed impossible to catch up with him. He was running and crying loudly. "Stop, Adrien, don't run," Caroline shouted, trying to calm her son so that he would listen to her and stop. "Adrien, wait." But the boy had no intention of stopping. He ran on and didn't even turn round at his mum's shouts. Caroline started to run faster. She sped up so fast that it looked like she was about to catch up with him. Her hand reached for him and was about to lay on his shoulder when suddenly the young mum crashed into an invisible barrier. The passage was closed to her. She started banging on this barrier, which had the sound of armored glass. She shouted, for she saw her son running away from her and not even paying attention to her. But there was another sound behind her, and it was no longer a child's cry. Behind her, she heard a hoarse and painfully familiar laugh. She turned round again, and this time it was Mrs. Gwyneth standing in front of her. She was laughing at the top of her lungs, pointing her finger at her daughter-in-law. The sound of her laughter echoed off the invisible and inexplicable walls of the White Room, echoing painfully in the girl's ears. Then the old woman began to make faces, thus as if to show her dominance over the girl. She mocked her, tried to humiliate her. In response, Caroline only knelt down and sobbed like her little child, who had just run away from her in an unknown direction. Caroline was awakened by the joyous cry of her husband. "Adrien," he said loudly. "Come on, hurry up. If we delay, we'll be late for daycare and Grandma won't be able to see him. You want Grandma Gwyneth to know where you're playing with the other kids, don't you?" "Do you? Well then, hurry up and show Granny Gwyneth where your things hang." It was a prodding tone with which the man seemed to be beckoning the children, offering them the dubious pleasure of a trip to the daycare center with Grandma Gwyneth. He got up before I did. A thought flashed through Caroline's still sleepy mind, and she jumped out of bed instantly. The door to their bedroom was open, and she could see what was going on in the main part of the flat. "Dad, why is Gran coming with us?" asked Ariel, already dressed by her father. "Why would she?" Benjamin squatted down in front of his little daughter. "Grandma wants to know where you spend your time. She doesn't know you at all yet, and she wants to get to know you better. Do you understand?" "I don't understand," Ariel said thoughtfully. "Well, you don't understand yet, but you will soon enough." He smiled and got to his feet. "Mom, you'll be there soon. Ariel and I are just waiting for you." Caroline, hearing this, immediately got out of bed finally and quickly went out into the living room. "Good morning, everyone." She tried to pretend she was happy. "Why didn't you wake your mum?" "Daddy woke us up." Ariel ran up to her mum and hugged her legs. "That's my girl," Caroline said, and hugged her daughter back. "Are you going to daycare?" "Yes," Benjamin answered. "I want to take Mum with us. Let her go for a ride. At least she can see where her grandchildren are being raised." "Where's Mrs. Gwyneth?" Caroline looked round, but she didn't see her mother-in-law. "She decided to take Adrien to daycare herself," Benjamin said enthusiastically, and looked in the direction of his son's room. At that moment, Caroline's mind turned upside down again. "How do I put this together myself?" she asked herself, and her inner voice repeated the question. At the same moment, Mrs. Gwyneth herself came out of Adrien's room with a striding gait, holding her little grandson by the hand. "We haven't seen her for 7 years," she told him. Caroline looked at her husband with angry eyes, but he smiled as if not noticing it, looking at his mother. "Well, are we all ready?" he asked, still as cheerfully. And when the children reluctantly answered him, "Yes," he led them into the hallway. Come on, now we're going to show Grandma where your garden is. And I'll show you where the crayfish are," Caroline thought at that moment. And at that moment she involuntarily realized that a scandal had become inevitable. She was simply obliged to protect her children in this situation. Not only should they not be witnesses to their father's behavior, and their grandmother's too, of course, but they certainly should not become participants in this clowning. "Everyone, Caroline, wait for Mum and me. We'll be back soon." He looked at her from the hallway. "Mum will be sharing her impressions of this morning's trip around town." "Yes, Mum?" "Yes, son, yes, I'll be getting acquainted with my children's nursery now," Mrs. Gwyneth said with a smile on her face, glancing back and forth at her son and daughter-in-law. "Bye, Caroline, will be quick." When they left the flat, Caroline, finding herself alone for a short time, decided to make a final decision on the matter. She already knew for sure that she would tell her husband everything she thought about it soon, maybe even today. And what next? If the husband, stupefied by his mother's condition, wants a divorce over this, well, the flat was shared, as they'd bought it when they were already married, And if the dreaded divorce was glittering on the horizon, the housing would have to be shared. Another thing was that it was possible to rent some flat for a while, since even the girl's own salary would allow for such expenditures. At the same time, there would still be money left over for the full maintenance of herself and 2 small children. But how stressful is it for the boys? What a horror. They have to endure right now, and, God forbid, will have to endure further. The situation was truly nightmarish, but the girl simply saw no other way out of it. In the end, she decided that if her husband threw her out of the flat, she would be satisfied with a rented one for the first time. Then after some time, she would probably take another flat in the mortgage, and there she and the children would continue to live happily without this asylum in their own flat. Soon Benjamin and Mrs. Gwyneth returned from their morning drive, and he was prodding his mother to share her impressions. "Well, Mum, tell Caroline what you think of the daycare center your grandson and granddaughter go to," Benjamin said with a smile. "Oh, Benjamin, everything is good. The daycare center is good and everything is wonderful. And the city is nice. Budapest doesn't have one like this. Dorothy never showed me one." Benjamin's mother was still in a delirious state, and almost every sentence she spoke was accompanied by a reference to that unfortunate Dorothy in Budapest, which she had never been to. It was beginning to annoy Caroline. The day passed as if on pins and needles. Caroline could hardly restrain herself from telling her husband everything right away. She locked herself in their bedroom and ordered, but was distracted every now and then by thoughts of the misfortune that was coming to their family. What could she do? There was no other option. Benjamin devoted the whole day to Mrs. Gwyneth, spending time with her, trying to talk to her about something. But as usual, any conversation with her sooner or later came to a dead end of non-existent facts from her biography. He decided that today he would stay at home, warned his superiors about it, and for 3 days remained at his complete disposal. Because what followed were 2 days off. In the evening, when she and her mother-in-law went for another drive to pick up Adrien and Ariel from daycare, Caroline began frantically pacing around the flat, contemplating the evening ahead. No, we can't delay here, she thought, and gathered the strength to tell her husband everything she had accumulated. But the children will be home tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. Should they witness the scandal? No, of course not. All right, let's go outside with him. The girl waited until Benjamin and Mrs. Gwyneth returned, accompanied by the children, and decided to wait a little while. It was really necessary to wait a little time here, because to talk about it when they had just returned would be a strange and somehow ridiculous decision. It had literally been an hour and a half since they had got home. Now the ailing mother-in-law, just like yesterday, was just sitting there watching some show on the television, and not the fact that she even realized what she was watching. Caroline walked out of their bedroom into the living room, and her husband immediately turned his attention to her. "Oh, Caroline," he exclaimed. "Look, make some tea, please." He was sitting next to his mother on the sofa and watching the show with her, trying to comment on almost every action of the characters. "Benjamin, can I have a word with you without the children hearing?" she asked, and nodded her head towards the exit of the flat. Her husband immediately frowned, sighed, and got up from the couch. "Now, Mum, just sit here, okay?" Benjamin asked, leaning over to his ailing mother. "I'm going to go out for some fresh air, okay?" "Yeah," Mrs. Gwyneth replied, keeping her eyes on the television. The couple threw on their jackets and went out into the entrance, and then out into the street, going under the very visor that had been broken by the local hooligans. "Well, what did you want to talk about so that the children wouldn't hear?" the man asked his wife. Caroline took one last breath, gathered her strength, and said, "Can this go on like this for long? I understand, but this wasn't our agreement. I realized if she'd come for a period of time, I'd have no complaints. But she came here to live. We realized she was ill, and you said she'd stay to live with us. Benjamin, I just have one question for you. What are you doing?" "What's wrong with you, seriously?" he asked the girl with a stony look. "What's wrong with me? I'm not happy with everything. Benjamin, your sick mum lives with us. But you didn't even ask me about it. It's like you've been switched overnight, and you've forgotten what solidarity and mutual respect are. Benjamin, you know what I'm talking about. I understand that you haven't seen your mother for a long time, and after seeing her, you have this love for her. But why did it make you lose your mind along with her? What exactly is your problem?" he asked separately and even more tensely. It's unbearable, Caroline said. I have to squeeze into my own flat. I have to protect our children from the nightmare you've given them. You realize that Adrien is 5 years old and Ariel is 4. They're still little. Benjamin, you know? And I highly doubt you've prepared them for this. It's so stressful for them. I can't even imagine how they'd feel. What are you talking about? Benjamin snapped out of it. My mother doesn't have much time left to live. I don't know how long, but it's not long. And you want her to spend the rest of her life in a mental institution. No, Caroline, I will not allow that. Benjamin, she lives in our flat. Not yours, not mine, but ours, okay? And you didn't consult me about it at all. You put me on the spot. I don't want our children to see this nightmare. Do you understand? You only think about yourself and your sick mom, but you don't think about how hard it is for me and the kids to live in this environment. What makes you think the kids are uncomfortable? They told me. Benjamin, you don't even ask them. You're just feeding them tons of this crazy, delusional stuff your mother spews out. I've got nothing against her, you know. I want what's best for her, but I want what's best for my children, who are now forced to endure this nightmare because of your stupid whim. Benjamin was extremely tense. So you want to wall the children off from their own grandmother? Yes? Yes, Caroline shouted. Because they're not going to get any use out of a grandmother like that. You know, God forbid they have some kind of psychological trauma from having little kids living in the same house with insanity. I seriously doubt they like it. Benjamin, our children shouldn't have to see your mother in that state, much less be involved in her life in any way. So that's it. Benjamin tensed even more. Okay, I heard you. And he instantly calmed down, as if there had been no scandal before. I'll do my best not to let the kids see this. I promise. The next morning, Caroline was urgently called into work for some important meeting with the designers. Mr. Carl was polite but made it clear that this meeting was very important and Caroline's presence was mandatory. He didn't want to hear any excuses or cancellations. The girl went to work in the morning and the children were taken to the daycare center again by Benjamin and Mrs. Gwyneth. Throughout the day, Caroline was very much winded. The meeting was long and very complicated. They discussed plans for commissioned projects for the next year, allocating them to different designers. Caroline had a lot of work to do 6 major projects for next year, all of which had to be completed on time. She was free when evening was taking over the space and gradually pushing the autumn sun behind the clouds. It was still a long way from dark, and so that there would be no fuss in the evening, Caroline had decided to pick up the children from daycare herself. She would have to overpay the taxi driver, but she didn't see that as a problem. The most important thing for her was that her children spent less time with their crazy grandmother and gradually going crazy father. Arriving at the daycare center, Caroline walked into the corridor of the group where her children were brought up. There was only one group. The brother and sister were lucky to be placed together, despite their different ages. There were few parents here, already dressing their children to go home. Usually all the kids were picked up later, but now Caroline wasn't alone in her decision to pick up the kids early. She said hello to all the mums she knew and called out to the childminder who was with the children at the moment. When she saw the young mother, the teacher named Mrs. Tiffany nodded and Caroline knew that her children were about to be taken out into the corridor. But Mrs. Tiffany, stepping out into the corridor where the children's lockers were, held only Ariel by the handle. "Hello, where's Adrien?" Caroline asked in confusion. "Hello, Adrien wasn't at daycare today. Dad only brought Ariel. He said he wasn't feeling well today and would stay home." "That's strange," Caroline frowned. "I thought he was fine yesterday. Well, we'll figure it out." Having collected her daughter, Caroline left the building, went to the taxi that was waiting for her, and they drove home. "Mum, where's Adrien?" Ariel asked in a low voice when they were already in the car. "Adrien is home. The teacher said Daddy decided to keep him." "Mum, he's not home," the little girl said sadly. "Grandma's taking him away." "Where did she decide to take him?" "I don't know. When we were going to the kindergarten, Dad and Grandma said that Adrien should be taken away. And Grandma said she'd take him." "Grandma said that?" Caroline asked in surprise. "Yes," replied Ariel. "When we get home, I'll deal with Grandma," Caroline said quietly. And neither she nor her daughter said another word on the way home. Caroline was depressed for the second day. Tears were pouring from her eyes, and of course she didn't even try to hold them back. Things were very bad. The world had lost all its colors, and frankly speaking, she didn't really want to live. And the thing was, Adrien wasn't home that day. When Caroline got home, she sent Ariel to her room and went to confront Benjamin about why he'd left the baby at home. She was sure to the last minute that Adrien was just sitting in his room minding his own business. As she approached her husband, she asked what was the matter, why he had decided to leave him at home, telling the childminder that he wasn't feeling well. She was so angry because her husband had promised her to shield the children from his mother's bad influence. They were not to see her condition because, as Caroline had already explained to him, it could provoke them to develop some psychological trauma. The question put to him was not answered by the husband. He, sitting on the sofa with his mother, still watching some soap operas, duplicated his words of yesterday that the children should be isolated from Mrs. Gwyneth. He didn't say anything else. Caroline decided to check her son's room, but he wasn't there. It had been 2 days since her son had gone missing. Her husband had not answered any of her questions, only saying that it was imperative to file a missing persons report with the police. But she did not trust him, as she understood that it was his mother, to whom he was now very much attached, most likely to persuade him to hide Adrien. Sleep proved to be restless then. Benjamin's mother was effectively destroying her children's family. Caroline told her husband that she had already filed a missing child report and that he didn't need to do anything. Of course, she resented Benjamin. Although, could it really be called resentment? She was angry. She felt hatred for her husband. Whenever she had tried to ask him where Adrien had gone, he had replied that it was imperative to keep his son away from his grandmother. He gave no other answers. It was simply not possible to achieve anything on his own. Caroline was in no hurry to make a police report. She was so desperate that her legs just didn't want to carry her to the police station. What was there to say about the station? Sometimes even getting out of bed to go to the loo was an impossible task. The depression developed very quickly. And the worst part was still Ariel seeing it all. She saw her brother missing, her crazy grandmother and father, and her dejected mother. Benjamin took her to daycare and didn't seem to wake his wife on principle. In the morning, she would wake up after Ariel was in the daycare center. She did not understand where her child was. She didn't know even approximately where he could have disappeared, or rather, where her crazy relatives could have taken him. They'd really gone off the rails. Mrs. Gwyneth was understandable. Her condition confirmed her diagnosis. Benjamin, on the other hand, was more complicated. He seemed so obsessed with these very diagnoses of his mom's that he was even willing to sacrifice his own child. And Caroline was sure he was slowly losing his mind, too. 2 days after Adrien went missing, Caroline decided to file a police report after all. She went to the station, where she was questioned about all the circumstances that might have preceded the disappearance. She was unable to say anything, only that her child was missing. It was very mentally difficult for her to report that, quite possibly, her spouse had abducted her son himself. That same day, Caroline decided to pick up her daughter from daycare. She didn't want Ariel to suffer the same fate as Adrien. Where had he been all this time? How was he now? Was he even alive? All this thinking made her want to fall to her knees and scream at the top of her voice. But the girl was in such a depressed state that even this she could not do. At the entrance to the kindergarten building, she saw standing on the porch a man with a cap in the corner who was quietly smoking. He had a very thick mustache of a dark color. He was also wearing thick-rimmed glasses. Caroline noticed him, but she didn't think much of it, even though she hadn't seen this man here before. But now she didn't care at all. When she entered the corridor of the group with colorful lockers, she saw the teacher helping some boy to undress. Caroline walked inside with a tired gait and called out to the teacher. "Mrs. Tiffany, hello," she mumbled faintly. "I'm here to pick up Ariel early today." The teacher noticed the girl at once, and her eyes sparkled with a glint. She bent over to the boy she was helping, tapped him on the shoulder and clapped him. He turned to where the woman was pointing. "Mum," he shouted and ran to Caroline. Before she knew it, she was in the awkward embrace of her young son. She looked at the boy. It was an exact copy of Adrien, but he was somehow very pale. It was like he didn't look like himself. It was understandable, for 2 days a 5-year-old child had been away from his parents, and he was nowhere to be found. The crying child told his mum everything. As it turned out, when they, that morning, together with his father and grandmother, Mrs. Gwyneth, went to kindergarten, he heard the adults discussing some strange topic. "Caroline's mum doesn't want the children to see you," Dad said as he drove. "They need to be kept away from you." "Son, do what you think is right," Grandma replied in a husky voice. "If you need to take them somewhere, then take them. I don't mind." "No, Mum," Dad continued. "You have to make sure they don't see you or know you at all. Do you understand? Adrien, for example, Caroline says he's afraid of you." "Afraid? Why would he be afraid of me?" Grandma asked in surprise. "I don't know, maybe he is. Of course he is. I don't do anything bad. Why should he be afraid of me?" "Well, if he is afraid, then he must be taken away. And there's nowhere and no one to take him." "You see, Mum," the driver replied calmly. "Then he needs to be given to someone without him seeing me." Adrien told Caroline that all the way to the kindergarten the strange conversations did not stop. The boy was very afraid and even took his sister's hand, thinking that it would be easier for him. And what did the father do when he came to the conclusion that the boy had to be given somewhere? He just dropped him off in the middle of town. "Daddy, Daddy." The boy was crying and couldn't talk properly. Dad stopped the car and he just pulled me out of the car and just left me. "He didn't say anything to you?" Caroline asked tensely. "Said I shouldn't see my grandmother. Said I was afraid of her, so it would be easier without her here," Adrien continued. "And I did, and I did. And I went and cried, Mum." "How did you get here, son? Did you walk here by yourself?" Caroline asked. "No, Uncle Joe helped me. He's the one with the mustache and the glasses," the boy chuckled. "He met me in the evening, asked where my parents were, and he took me back to his place. He said that I shouldn't be afraid of him, and that tomorrow morning he would take me to my kindergarten. I told him where my daycare was today, and he took me." Caroline immediately looked towards the exit. She took her son's hand and headed towards the exit. There, the man who called himself Uncle Joe was finishing his cigarette and was about to leave. Caroline sprinted out of the garden with Adrien and called out to him. "Wait," she shouted, choking back tears. The man immediately turned round and, seeing the familiar boy, walked as fast as he could towards them. He confirmed everything Adrien had told his mum. He had met the boy on the street in the evening when he had been walking around the town looking for his mum, crying quietly. He immediately realized that there was something wrong and told him that he would take him to the daycare center. But it was already evening, and probably the kindergarten was already closed. For a long time, the man tried to find out which kindergarten Adrien attended. After several liters of tears, he was able to tell him that the kindergarten was called Rainbow. The very next day, the man took the child to the kindergarten. He gave him a lollipop and was leaving. Caroline took a report that her child was missing, but wrote a new report on her own husband, Benjamin. She told the investigator everything. The investigator also listened to the boy himself. As it later turned out, Benjamin's schizophrenia had worsened. He had it before, but only in a hidden form. And after a recent meeting with his mother, from whom he was separated for 7 years because of great stress, this terrible disease made itself known. Benjamin and his mother, Mrs. Gwyneth, were committed to a psychiatric hospital. The investigator promised to look into how this sick woman was allowed on the plane and why she was even released with her diagnosis. The children, of course, needed the help of a child psychologist. Adrien had, after all, developed a psychological trauma that made him very withdrawn and shy. But child psychologist Mrs. Sandra worked with him for a long time, and eventually the boy seemed to forget everything that happened to him. But the daughter didn't need a psychologist. After the examination, it turned out that the girl was fine. The only thing perhaps was that she was frightened by the behavior of her grandmother and father and was very worried when her brother disappeared. But all in all, everything was fine. The flat, of course, didn't have to be shared with anyone. The flat was left entirely to Caroline. She had unilaterally divorced Benjamin and didn't even visit him in the hospital. She had a great dislike for the man, even despite his diagnosis. Time passed and the family, certainly not in the same way as before, went on with their normal lives. The children were happy, and Mum was even happier. Ryan moved skillfully through the city, trying to avoid the traffic jams on the road. His hands were shaking, his nerves were on edge, and a man's voice sounded over the speakerphone. "It can't be. It's not Emily," he answered the call. "I understand your shock, Mr. Ryan, but that's what we're waiting for you to identify. We need to make sure the woman on our table is your spouse, Emily." "I mean, she's quite young, only 31 years old. We wanted kids so badly," Ryan muttered. His insanely expensive sports car maneuvered between cars with ease. He was only a year older than his wife, but he already owned his own company and had a noticeable profit. The family didn't need anything and were respected both in and out of town. Emily had been complaining of chest pains for a long time. Neither of us gave it much thought. The words came out in a flood. The unexpected interlocutor listened to him quietly, accustomed to the behavior of people in grief. "She worked hard. The whole business was held together by the two of us. No wonder I can't believe it." His voice sounded broken. "I'm dismissing all sorts of tests and autopsies in advance. There's no need for that at all. Emily has experienced enough pain as it is. Let her body not be touched." At the morgue, Ryan was met by pathologist Paul. "You and I spoke on the phone." He touched Ryan's shoulder lightly with a mournful face. "This way, please." Ryan made his way into a brightly lit room with green tiles on the walls. There was a body lying on a gurney under a sheet. "Oh my God," Ryan exclaimed. He could barely hold back the tears. As Paul pulled the sheet away from Emily's face, Ryan whispered, "That's my girl." "I'm sorry for your loss," Paul said. He'd seen a lot of things in his job, but seeing the emotions of the relatives of the dead had always been difficult. Ryan could tell by the look on his face how broken he was, but still held himself in check, not letting the tears spill over. He gingerly touched the lifeless face. Emily's body was still warm. "She was alive until half an hour ago," he said thoughtfully. "Why didn't I know this morning was the last time I'd talked to her?" A few minutes later, Ryan stepped out into the hallway and his face changed. He turned to the orderlies with a calm look. "Guys, I have a favor to ask of you. You won't be offended by the price. We need to get to the funeral as soon as possible. And unnecessary fussing with tests and autopsies will only stall things. You better hurry up and release the body. Get everything ready." Ryan held out a few bills to the orderlies. "This is between you and me. Absolutely." "We won't tell anyone," Alex promised. He and his partner had been frequent participants in illegal activities after a couple of sentences for extortion and disorderly conduct. The two prison mates had only managed to get jobs as morgue attendants. "I'm counting on you." Ryan was pleased with the way things were set up, but was in no hurry to leave for the office. He still had to inform all of his family and friends about the untimely death of his dear wife, listen to tons of condolences, and receive many visitors. But for now, he had to make sure Paul didn't cause him any problems, and Emily wouldn't bother him again. Finally, he would be able to say goodbye to her for good. In the meantime, Alex and Jason were preparing to transport Emily's body to the funeral home. Beautiful woman she was, still young, Jason said, looking at Emily's face. "So is her husband taking a lot of grief? What's on these rich people's minds?" "I don't know. First all shaking over his wife's body. Now he wants to bury it. But what do I care? The main thing is he got the money. There's not much to do. I'm not used to this kind of thing. I've only been out for 4 months. I'm not going back." "All right, don't worry. You'll be fine. We just gotta keep the cops off our backs. Look at her. She looks alive." "That's kinda creepy," Alex laughed. Jason took a closer look at the dead woman. It's real, and her skin is soft. He poked a finger into her exposed shoulder and shuddered. "That's the way I've never seen it, and I never will." Alex crossed himself. Flashing the voice of Paul appearing made the orderlies wince. "Where are you taking her? And I haven't done an autopsy yet. Come on, guys. Get her over here." Alex and Jason looked at each other. "That's not what we agreed to with Ryan," Jason said. "So this, maybe he refused to do an autopsy. Says he has a funeral to arrange. Busy man, businessman." Paul frowned and walked out into the hallway. Immediately, he spoke to Ryan. "I can't release your wife's body without an autopsy. In order for me to sign all the paperwork, I have to do the necessary procedures." "What are they going to give you?" "To me, the situation is transparent. Emily died of a heart attack. I agree with that, and I don't require confirmation. I don't need any tests. Are they going to bring my spouse back to life? Ryan asked indignantly. He noted that Paul was a man of principle, so he wouldn't just neglect his professional duties and risk his reputation and career. Come closer, Ryan asked and reached into his pocket for his wallet. Is such a request satisfactory to you? He handed Paul all the bills he had left. He raised his eyebrows in surprise, not at all expecting this turn of events. He hastily accepted the money and stuffed it into his pants pocket so it wouldn't fall out. Looking around, he leaned over to Ryan. "Well, that's a different conversation," he said in a soft, friendly tone. "I would be more than happy to expedite the process of transferring your spouse's body, Ryan. Doing the autopsy is my responsibility." "Fine, do your autopsy," Emily's husband snapped. But he immediately calmed down. Now he didn't have to worry about the morgue staff. He'd bribed everyone, and they couldn't report him to anyone, or they'd be out of a job. If the orderlies lost a little, Paul would lose his license. And if he decides to talk too much. Without wasting a minute, Paul got to work. "Guys, you see the body? Let's do an autopsy," he commanded, looking at Alex and Jason. Only a few seconds separated Emily from the irreparable. "Don't touch her. Don't touch that woman." This shouted suddenly across the hallway from some madman who had inexplicably found himself in the morgue. He was breathing heavily and holding his heart, trying to catch his breath. "Who the hell is this weirdo?" Jason stared at him. Standing before them was the usual grimy hobo in dirty clothes, gathered into one comfortable set from several dogs. It was hard to tell the age of the tired man with the beard and bushy eyebrows. "Are you lost or something?" Alex addressed him. "Or are you having trouble with your head? Get out of here. This isn't a circus for you." "That's my wife. Don't touch her. Call the police." "And him." He pointed his finger with frantic eyes at Ryan, who froze in place as if struck by thunder. "There's Andrew." Ryan couldn't even find the words to somehow shut the intruder up. "Call me right now. What are you standing there for, you morons?" "What's all the noise?" Paul stepped out into the hallway. He looked around sternly at everyone present. "Is Emily here to see you?" "She's my wife. Don't cut her. Call the police. I'm begging you." "Okay." Paul nodded and pulled off his clean gloves. He immediately threw Ryan an angry glare. If he'd only known what he'd offered him the money for, he never would have taken it. The police officers who arrived on the scene at first took Andrew for a lunatic. "What do we have here? Drunken ramblings?" Russell asked tiredly, looking at him. "I'm neither drunk nor crazy. My name is Andrew Gulliver, and Emily, who was brought in this morning, is my wife, or rather Gulliver's ex-wife." "The same one," Vincent aghast, trying to make out the missing businessman from 5 years ago in the scruffy tramp across the street. "The same one," Andrew nodded. And this, he shifted his gaze to Ryan, who had arrived and was prevented from sneaking out before the police arrived. "Alex, Jason, this is my former friend Ryan. I know everything about you now. I know your sneaky nature." No one expected Andrew to lunge at his former friend and punch him with his fist. As Ryan slammed into the wall and butted the back of his head, Vincent and Russell immediately grabbed Andrew under the arms, holding him in place. "And I'm going to nail you with my own hands for her, you bastard." Andrew didn't stop lashing out. "Ryan, do you hear that? Do you hear that?" shouted Ryan. "This is a direct threat of reprisal. You're all witnesses." The bickering of the men was broken by a loud female scream. Everyone rushed to the section where a terrified Emily was sitting on the floor with her arms wrapped around herself. "Emily." Andrew dropped down beside her, covering her with his jacket and pulling her close to him. "My love, I'm here. I'm with you again." Emily was shaking. She was weak and scared. Several pairs of eyes stared at her in horror. Ryan turned the palest of them all. "There you go. If you hadn't run in, she would have been properly scrutinized by now," Jason ahead. Realizing that Paul had almost performed an autopsy on a living person, Vincent looked around at those present. "Doctor, examine the victim and sedate her." He pointed to Andrew. "Will you come with me?" "I'll get the guys," Russell nodded to him. "I'll stay here to keep an eye on the victim. I'm asking for the pathologist." On the way to the police station, Andrew was shaking. He couldn't believe what had happened to him in just a couple hours. Now his life was going to change. Things would go back to the way they were before. He still hoped he could get it all back. But what worried him most was Emily's fate. He loved her so much even though he hadn't been there for 5 years. How would she be without him? Could that pathologist be trusted? Andrew didn't relax when Vincent spoke to him. He got a mug of hot sweet tea and a good attitude. "Tell me an order, Andrew," Vincent asked him. He sighed, closed his eyes a little, and spoke. "Do you know who I am? 5 years ago, I was traveling to Oakville to negotiate with Ryan. We knew each other from university, studying economics together. We dreamed of owning our own business together, and we had the same views on doing business. I considered Ryan my friend." At those words, Andrew gripped the handle of his mug tightly, realizing how wrong he was. "I knew him before I knew Emily. We used to vacation together a lot. Sometimes Ryan introduced us to his passions, but his relationships never lasted long. I want to emphasize that I trusted Ryan like a brother. I had no idea that he would betray me in such a way." Our meeting with potential companions in Oakville promised a lucrative partnership. Ryan and I, already anticipating a huge profit, were overjoyed. And we were the young sharks of business. We were role models for young people. Everyone dreamed of such a meteoric rise. Our firm developed surprisingly fast. When it first started, we couldn't have dreamed that it wouldn't be a year before we could afford to buy our own place. So on the way to Oakville, it was a 3-hour drive, but I ate a big meal before I got there. And Ryan started begging me to stop along the way and get something to eat at a restaurant. I didn't refuse, and I didn't suspect a thing. Even when the best restaurant Michael's turned out to be just a canteen with some suspicious types hanging around. They were on to us as soon as we got out of the car. Ryan was never short on words and could stoop to any level to prove his superiority. Before I knew it, I was in the center of a scuffle, but I was the only one getting hit. I didn't realize it was Ryan. He lured me to this camp where no one knew us by sight, hired some thugs, and got away with it. I was in a lot of trouble back then. I spent the night in the alley where I'd been beaten the night before. I woke up with a buzzing head and my mind was blank. I lost my memory, and from that moment on I didn't even know who I was. A group of vagabonds took me in and taught me how to survive. Together we roamed from one village to another until we stopped here. I didn't realize how close I was to my former life. At one time, I was an idol to the people of this town, and then I became invisible. So today I went to the store for tea and a cake, as I always did in the morning. Sometimes they'd let me eat right there and watch TV. That's how I found out about the news in the city and the world. Today there was a report about Emily's death. They said that millionaire Nesterov's wife had died of a heart attack right in the office of Ryan and Enemy. Emily's picture was shown close up, and something clicked in my head. I screamed in pain. Her face stirred everything inside of me, the memory cells seeming to fill up one by one. The store clerk was startled when I burst into tears right there on the sales floor. My beloved Emily had died. I couldn't bear the thought, and then I felt inside that I needed to go to the city morgue. I needed to go to the city morgue. I don't know how to explain it. Call it a premonition if you want. But I wasn't wrong. I was sure she was there, that she was alive, that I'd make it in time. Vincent and everyone watching Andrew's testimony were shocked. There was no doubt, even on the face of it. It was safe to say that the story had been told by a businessman who had disappeared 5 years ago. The story was incredible, even momentous. In one day, Andrew was not only able to remember himself, but also lost his wife and then saved her from death at the hands of a despicable friend traitor. Soon the whole town was buzzing about the incredible incident. The police remained silent, but journalists got wind of the sensation anyway. The news began to report on the miraculous return of the businessman and the true identity of his friend. By the time Andrew arrived at the hospital to talk to his beloved, Ryan had managed to escape. "I'm not staying here," he muttered. As soon as the police swarmed into the morgue, he looked threateningly at Jason and Alex for being caught up in an obscure scam. "If you blab, if you regret our case." His buddy, recently released from juvie, understood his point. They didn't know who they could be impertinent with, who they'd better not put sticks in their wheels. "Doctor, how is she?" Andrew was only concerned about the state of Emily, who was in no hurry to talk to anyone after what had happened. She gave Russell a statement and asked him not to bother her. After the dose of medication that was administered to the patient, her body has weakened, but the IVs will do their job. The other issue is the psychological state. Her mood is volatile now, so be prepared for tears or hysterics. It's not an easy situation from what I hear, the doctor advised Andrew. He entered the room and stood still for a moment. The same clear eyes of his now ex-wife looked at him open. "Emily, darling, I'm so sorry, I didn't even know." She turned away, unable to bear the gaze of the man she had betrayed. "I thought you were dead. You were gone. I was a wreck. Ryan was there for me. He helped me through my grief and get back on my feet. He was there for me when I couldn't see anyone else. I don't think you can forgive me. I won't forgive myself after this either." She covered her face with her hands. "What are you talking about?" Andrew sat down on the chair next to the bed. "You didn't know, did you? You didn't know how dishonest and devious he is. It's all a plan to eliminate both of us. You're just as much a victim as I am. But I married him. Not even a year after you disappeared, I married him." "So rashly," Emily sobbed. Andrew just put his arm around her. "We'll get through this. We'll get through it all. If you still want to be with me, of course." The ex-spouse's home was surrounded by reporters and cameramen. Ryan didn't distinguish himself here either. He didn't even offer Emily a change of venue after her first husband went missing. Ryan simply took him out of the picture by taking possession of what he once owned. The firm the two young friends had started in the past was now owned by Ryan and Emily. "I need to get back to normal. I'm weaned on technology," Andrew warned his beloved. "Gotta catch up. The current specialist is much more knowledgeable about our field than I am." "It's okay, we'll live. The firm is still in place, everything works," Emily consoled him. "You remember I'm very capable." After Andrew's return, she went to work and involved him in the business. It saved her from the awkwardness of being with her ex-husband in the big quiet house. The past 5 years had changed both of them so much that now their relationship was going through a major crisis. They had breakfasted together, dined together, chatted politely, but did not broach the topics of concern. The police were relentlessly pursuing the sensational case, but Ryan seemed to vanish. He was elusive. He disappeared without leaving a trace. When the decision was made to freeze his accounts to make it harder for him to travel as far away as possible, or even to another country, the following came to light. Ryan had thought of several contingencies in advance and transferred all the funds from his account to an offshore account. The authorities had no access to it, which made finding Ryan much more difficult. Emily and Andrew, meanwhile, were living under the same roof as strangers. Each had their own burdens, but they were in no hurry to share them. Both of them were concerned about Ryan's fate. They dreamed of the moment when he would be caught and brought to justice for all his evil deeds. At times, the ex-spouses spent evenings together, watching movies, talking about detached topics, not touching on personal matters. They feared they wouldn't be able to catch up. "I find it hard to believe that now we live as if we were strangers." Emily shared her worries over dinner one night. 5 years ago, we were newlyweds making plans, and then fate threw it all away for us. Can we get that back? For the first time in the few weeks of living with her, Andrew dared to take her hand without permission. "My darling, just remember how it all started. Can't we do this anymore? Did everything inside of us die when I was a vagabond and didn't even remember you? I still longed for you. I was in a lot of pain without you, not physically, but being separated from you hit me hard." That evening, they spent time sitting in each other's arms. Andrew and Emily took their time. They did not want to scare away the trust in each other that had been rekindled between them. The former spouses recalled the moment they met. "You then just graduated from the institute." Eyes burning in the hands of a red diploma, Andrew recalled with admiration. "I even remember what you were wearing then." "Yeah, they didn't want to take me anywhere," Emily replied. "I did great during my internship. I was recommended to several firms, but none of them dared to hire me. I was counting on you so much back then. As a young company, your demands couldn't have been too high. When I saw you two lanky, budding entrepreneurs, startups for what?" Andrew took offense with joking resentment. "You should have seen yourself then, all important, even though you're only 2 years older than me," Emily laughed. "I knew I had to wave my hair in front of you, flap my eyes. And when you saw me in I never underestimated you," he declared. "Sure, you impressed me with your looks, but without your knowledge, the firm wouldn't have become so successful, at least not as quickly. You've been a great help to us, and you deserve the CEO position you now hold." Andrew had a tough time in his former position. He was once again a respected businessman who didn't need anything, but he realized how far behind the modern experts were. Without giving in to hubris, he took business courses that dealt with the latest trends in the world of business and social media. "We have a whole department dedicated to this," Emily explained to Andrew with a satisfied look. 70% of purchases people make online. "Oh, and the number of shoppers has increased due to shipping." "Yes, things have changed." Andrew nodded without regret as Emily took him around the office. "It's enviable that I wasn't involved in every new phase. I'd like to see you grow." But Andrew had plenty of reasons to be upset as well. The employees who worked at the company under Ryan and Emily had only heard about the once savvy Andrew. They learned more from the news when he was reported missing. The boss's ex-husband had miraculously returned. Everyone expected incredible solutions, new breakthrough ideas from him, but they were disappointed. "Andrew, understand, these are people of a different generation. They're younger and tech-savvy," Emily told him. "You can be angry all you want, but your courses are nothing if you refuse to put knowledge into practice. We got rid of the old methods a long time ago. You have to get over it." "I know," Andrew admitted his mistakes. "Even the junior staff look at me like I'm an ancient man. I'm trying to be someone you can count on. I want to do business wisely, but I need to get used to it." But it wasn't just the situation at Beloved's firm that worried Andrew. The results of Emily's blood tests, which were conducted to detect the presence of poison in her blood, made him nervous. Ever since his return, he had suspected that Emily was hiding something from him. "Emily, I've had enough of this. I can't guess what's going on inside you anymore," he declared once right in the office. He didn't have the energy to wait until he got home. Emily had gone pale. It was clear she was caught off guard. "What you're about to hear could knock you out," she warned and lowered her eyes. "My blood results showed you didn't poison yourself, did you?" They were clean. Andrew couldn't help himself and immediately apologized. "No, that's not it. Anyway, I'm pregnant with Ryan's baby, naturally. I didn't know how to tell you that." Andrew was silent briefly, sighed, and spoke. "He was your husband. You were planning a family? I have nothing to blame you for." "The baby is in no way to blame," Andrew said confidently. He saw no reason at all to keep such wonderful news from him. "I was afraid it would alienate you. We're very careful with each other as it is. And I'm so tired of living in constant tension." "Then don't." "It's not good for the baby." Andrew sat down on Emily's desk and put his arm around her. "I'm not going anywhere else. No one's going to make me. And this baby is ours, no one else's. He wouldn't be happy with a father like Ryan himself." Emily couldn't hold back the tears. She had held in all the excitement for so long that it didn't take long for relief to set in. She and Andrew would be a family again. They would have a baby just like they had once dreamed. "I'll definitely have to get over my ambition now," Andrew said, rocking Emily in his arms. "I won't let you sit in the office so much. You'll be relaxing at home. There are all sorts of healthy goodies, but I won't lock you up to work remotely either, of course, but you've taken on too much." "The staff is relaxed. I recognize your grip now," laughed Emily, wiping away tears. The whole truth was known, and she was no longer afraid of being rejected. Andrew remained just as sensitive, caring, and attentive. "We're going to have a family. I wanted my baby so badly, and now we will have one. Thank you for hosting us." Over the next few months, Andrew never ceased to amaze Emily. He tempered his ego and began to adopt the experience of the new staff to fit in. Soon he was to take over the role of the head of the firm because Emily had to take care of her health. She, of course, filed for divorce, and the former spouses modestly signed after that in the registry office. At the time of Andrew's return, journalists did not stop following them on their heels, so the newlyweds acted cautiously. They hid Emily's pregnancy and hired bodyguards to drive away the reporters hanging around the house in search of another sensation. "Sooner or later, they'll figure it out and start trumpeting the baby," Emily reassured her husband. "Soon I won't be able to hide my tummy." "You're overreacting. It's how they earn their bread," she continued. "Oh, I think I'm going to have a 10-foot fence around the house soon," Andrew grumbled. He pretended he hadn't heard. He was annoyed at the intrusion of others into their lives. Besides, he didn't want Ryan, wherever he was, to find out about the baby. Andrew's only dream was to keep his family safe from outsiders. Next to him, Emily felt at ease. She began to trust Andrew more. The same tenderness that had driven them crazy a few years ago had appeared between them. "You've gotten too tense," she said, kneading her spouse's shoulders. "I don't know how you're coping. You've changed a lot, and that makes me happy." Andrew proudly accepted the praise from his wife's lips, putting the well-being of the family first. He found the strength to run the firm. In just 3 months, he had to absorb a lot of new information, to find an approach to the team and take some of Emily's worries away from her. Now she was much less likely to show up at the office, but she did conference calls with the staff via video link. And soon Andrew faced massive dissatisfaction from his subordinates. "Andrew, things are not going well at all. The complaints about reduced pay are increasing every day," his deputy reported. "I'm aware of the current situation. Ryan has let us down. Funding has been cut many times over. But employees have not received their due for months. Our market position is down. Everyone is working their hardest to move up, and they're not getting any incentives for it," Andrew replied. "Yes, I admit it. I've long preferred to ignore our real perspective," the latter agreed with his deputy. "That's why, Brian, we need to downsize. I can't afford that kind of staffing at the moment. Lape approved the applications of those who wish to leave. We'll work with those who are committed, and I'll make sure they earn a decent wage. It's fairer that way." Emily supported her husband as best she could. She hoped the police would find Ryan and bring him to justice. After all, he had absconded with money that didn't just belong to him. But as the months passed, there was no decisive news from law enforcement. Andrew returned home, increasingly irritable. The only thing that could calm him down was the developing son in Emily's belly. She, on the other hand, was tireless. She didn't want to quit her job and would often linger over her laptop until her husband came home from work and told her, "Honey, the baby will be here soon, and you so-and-so will not get away from the screen." He said. "Oh, come on. I'm a businesswoman after all," she replied. It was as if Andrew had predicted the birth of little Peter. The baby had expressed a desire to be born that very night. Emily felt in bed that the sheet beneath her was wet. "Andrew," with panic in her voice, she shoved her husband. "Andrew, wake up." I think it started. An agitated Emily was brought to the birthing center by ambulance. Andrew was so worried that he was afraid to drive himself. The thought of the agony his wife was about to go through was unnerving. "Please sign." He hurried the paramedic as he and his partner loaded his wife onto the gurney. "Andrew, don't talk under your arm. They know what to do," she said. Andrew was measuring the hallway of the maternity ward with his steps. He couldn't understand why Emily was so much calmer than he was. It was scary to imagine what it was really like for her. She must have prepared herself for labor. After all, she often repeated how she wanted to get rid of the annoying belly as soon as possible. An exhausted Emily fell into a blissful sleep when she was moved to a separate room where all the babies were kept. In the morning, when it was time for her son's feeding, the young mother was in for another shock. "I mean, how? What do you mean, Peter? Not there." She didn't understand the first time, looking demandingly at the nursing staff. "What do you mean you lost my baby? Are you out of your mind? That's impossible." Andrew rushed to the maternity hospital as soon as he received the alarming call from his wife. The police also arrived on the scene immediately. The obstetricians ran around the ward but couldn't find the missing baby. "So Tara, who worked here on the night shift, is missing," Vincent clarified, questioning the entire staff. "Find him now," Emily yelled at everyone. She didn't fall into despair, but instead brought the entire maternity ward to its feet so they wouldn't sit still. "I'm going to sue every last one of you." "Honey, you need to calm down. You're still too weak." Andrew tried to put her to bed, but his spouse refused to stand idly by. He used all of his connections to enlist the necessary forces to find the newborn. "Tara's not at home. Neighbors said they didn't see her this morning or hear the baby crying," Russell shared with his partner. "She has a cabin in Riverside. Inherited it from her grandfather. Did you know?" replied Tara's co-worker Ellen, who had been called into work to replace a runaway employee. "We'll leave immediately," Vincent nodded to Russell. "We'll get the address on the way. We need to find out about her loved ones. Who was she seeing? Maybe this guy went somewhere and stole a baby without thinking of the consequences. Or he planned it all a long time ago," Russell said grimly, which was absolutely no consolation to Andrew and Emily. Tara didn't hear when 2 police cars pulled up to her wooden house. She was preoccupied with a screaming Peter who wouldn't eat the formula despite being terribly hungry. "Yes, hush, hush. We need to be patient for a little while. Tara rocked him in her tired arms. "He will come for you soon. You have not been abandoned, don't be afraid." Tara Woods, leave the house immediately with the baby. Came a stern male voice into the mouthpiece. Tara knew she had no escape route. Oh, and her accomplice hadn't shown up yet. She should have trusted him so much. "Tara, I repeat, come out with the baby." "Relieve yourself now," Russell's voice urged her. Tara wrapped Peter in a small blanket and opened the front door, putting one hand out in front of her. "I'm unarmed," she shouted. One of the operatives immediately ran up to Tara and took Peter away. Emily hadn't done anything to him. She wasn't going to. She was forced to put her hands behind her back to be handcuffed, she said through tears. After calming down, Tara laid it all out at the police station, not holding back a single detail. "Ryan Michaels, my lover. We've been together for over a year. I knew he was married, but he said the passion between them was long gone, that they lived as strangers." "But you told me yourself, Tara. Were you planning to kidnap a child to raise together?" the investigator asked. "Yes. No, I don't know." Ryan freaked out when he found out Emily was pregnant, even though she got back together with her ex-husband. Ryan had calculated everything. The baby's definitely his. He's got a lot of contacts around town and debtors. Knew when Emily's pregnancy was established. He never wanted kids. At least he didn't discuss it with. I thought it was too early to plan a family, so I didn't ask. And Ryan always seemed like a free spirit to me. I was even surprised he was so caught up in the idea of taking the baby for himself, and I couldn't help but help him. He always had a knack for persuasion, Tara admitted to her shame. He's the kind of man who knows how to find the right words to get his way. It's always happened to me. And now it's going to be a lesson to me. Am I looking at jail time? If you tell us his exact whereabouts, you might get probation. Russell looked at Tara carefully. I don't know where he's gone. Believe me, I'm not covering for him. Ryan always does what he wants and doesn't answer to anyone. He's got some business of his own, maybe illegal. And he always told me it was best not to get involved. Emily was ready to strangle Tara with her own hands, the one who had put their son in danger. When you find this scoundrel, he'll answer for everything, she told Vincent, who returned the baby to her and told her about the midwife's role in the case. He won't get away with it, that's for sure. You can be sure of that. For double attempted murder, grand larceny, various tax frauds, and stealing the baby. He's going away for a long time. Thank you, Andrew shook the policeman's hand. And please find him as soon as possible. We'd like to know our boy is safe. No matter how hard the police officers tried, the surveillance of Tara's village home had no success. Ryan had likely seen the police cars and the commotion that had engulfed the village. So he didn't even go near the place where he hoped to meet his kidnapped son. We were to locate Ryan's account, Russell informed them. It was frozen, so now he can't use it no matter how hard he tries. And we know he's in our area, and the lack of money will prevent him from hiding well and traveling freely. Thank you. Please keep us informed, Emily replied. She felt more comfortable with both personal guards and police patrols on duty outside their home for safety. When are we going to have a quiet life? Emily sighed, looking at her son. I won't let you get hurt for anything. We won't. Andrew touched his finger to the little nose and kissed his wife. Be that as it may, and we need to get on with our lives and raise our miracle. Andrew continued to drive to the office every day, but often called home and asked Emily to show him her son. Congratulations, shouted his staff at the firm. May your baby grow up healthy to the delight of his parents. And this is to your family from us. Jessica, who kept the office clean, held out a basket of various baby products to the director. Thank you so much, friends. This is new to us, so don't be surprised if I come in even more tired than before. The co-workers dispersed to their seats. Andrew made a few calls to organize a small banquet during lunch and treat his subordinates to Peter's birthday party. But a few days later, the irreparable happened. Andrew was sure he was among the last to leave the office. He saw Jessica on the way, finishing cleaning up the last rooms. See you tomorrow, Andrew, she said with a smile as she passed by. See you tomorrow, Jessica. He didn't bother to set the alarm. He knew the cleaning lady would take care of that when she was done. He had only had time to drive away from work for a few minutes when he got the call about the fire. No way. No, he should. And called the fire department. He was the first one outside the company building and ran inside. Andrew was sure Jessica hadn't left yet, and the building was already on fire. "Jessica," Andrew shouted, "call out. We need to get out now. The whole place is on fire. Jessica, where are you?" But the girl didn't respond. She had lost consciousness because she was too close to the utility room where the fire had occurred. Andrew did not waste his strength to put out the fire, although the thought that he might lose the building in the fire prevented him from thinking soberly. Jessica was saved at the cost of the burns on Andrew's face. He felt no pain due to shock, but Emily, who arrived at the scene of the fire, screamed when she saw his burned face and cheek. There were burns on Andrew's body as well, but they could at least be hidden under his clothes. After being hospitalized and discharged from the hospital, Andrew became despondent. He couldn't look at his disfigured face and didn't want to show his son his face. "He shouldn't see me like this. I'm scaring him." He fumbled with Peter when Emily wanted to give him the baby. "Honey, don't say that. He feels like you're his daddy and he needs you. Please don't push him away." But Andrew was hard to argue with. Having lost his office in the fire, he didn't know what to do next, and his life was failing again. He had missed out on his life's work when things were just starting to get better again. "We'll try again," Emily reassured him, stroking his hair. "We're both experts, after all. Except we don't have the money. We can't spend all our savings on starting from scratch. We have a child. We can't jeopardize his future. We have to think straight and live within our means." Andrew had to use a mask to appear in public. His appearance aroused morbid curiosity in others, and some even shouted or turned away with a look of dislike on their faces. Andrew managed to get a job in the office of a large company and worked hard for several months to prove his professionalism. He was now a rank-and-file employee, not a manager. Together with Emily, they loved spending time with their son, tried to devote every free minute to him. But Peter's mother did not stay at home for long and gave him to kindergarten. Emily also got a job. Andrew no longer neglected his child and eventually came to terms with the way he looked. Peter adored his parents, always reaching out to them. The 3-year-old was inquisitive and made friends easily at daycare. "Jessica invited us to visit," Emily informed her husband. After Andrew rescued his former employees, she kept coming over to thank them, and sometimes babysat Peter when both his parents were busy with work. "I'm glad she met a decent man, and now she's a mom herself. You and she have become great friends." Andrew smiled contentedly. "You treat her like a little sister?" "You could say we're kin now. After all, events like this bring us closer together," replied Emily. As the years went by with each of Peter's birthdays, Andrew and Emily wondered where time flew so quickly. "You're a schoolboy now," Emily cried after her son's first lineup, squatting down in front of him. "You've gotten so big." "Mom, don't cry." Peter wiped her tears with his warm palms. "There's a lot to be happy about. I'm going to grow up soon. I'll start earning a lot of money so I can get Daddy's surgery. I mean, he's embarrassed about his scars." "Oh, you, my attentive boy." His mother hugged him. Unfortunately, the amiable Peter became the subject of bullying by the children at school. They saw Andrew, who always walked the streets with his head down and covered by the collar of his coat or jacket. "Your dad's a freak. Your dad's your freak," the bullies teased Peter. "My parents call him Quasimodo," another silly boy chuckled. "Don't call him that." "My dad isn't scary," Peter defended his father. He could barely hold back tears of resentment. But his frustration only served to irritate the little bullies. "I'm going to go to school and make all parents ashamed of raising their children." Andrew raged when he learned that his son was being teased again because of his scars. "Don't they have any shame? Don't they know the pain they're causing him?" "We should go together," Emily suggested. "If neither the head teacher nor the class teacher will do anything about it, we'll find other ways. I'm sick of seeing my son in tears all the time, too." "It's all my fault." Andrew sat down on the couch, wrapping his arms around his head. He thought it was his fault that Peter was being bullied at school. "Don't you dare even think that," Emily declared. "We need to get all the parents together with the kids to explain to them how you got those scars. Let them know that Papa Peter is a hero, that he sacrificed his business, his health, and his looks to save another man's life. But who among them would go to such lengths? My guess is not many." "No need to make a hero a laughingstock," Andrew immediately retorted. The burns he had received had made him an even more humble man. More often than not, he wanted to be the most inconspicuous man in society, but Emily knew how honorable, honest, and decent her husband was. Why should you, Peter, suffer for these ignoramuses? No, I won't let them bully you, she persisted. Emily still insisted, and in front of the whole class, she reprimanded the very bullies who were mocking her family. But the effect of her fiery speech was short-lived. Now the troublemakers tried not to taunt Peter on school grounds, but harassed him on the bus on the way home. Her son of Quasimodo, Alina, who was sitting 2 seats away, said loudly, "Hey, you freak, I'm addressing you." "Leave me alone," Peter responded angrily. "So he's hiding behind Mom's skirt. And Dad didn't even show up for school," said the other bully, and they both laughed. Peter sat there burning with shame. He realized that the adult passengers had heard everything, but no one even thought of standing up for him. At the next stop, when most of the people got off, Alina and Artur sat closer to Peter and started shoving him in the shoulder. "Well, where's your hero, Daddy? What's he not protecting you?" The driver, who could now hear the mocking talk of the first graders, could not stand their insolence, and at the next stop made his way into the cabin. "What are you kids bothering the kid for? Do I have to drop you off at full throttle?" His voice sounded menacing, so Peter's assailants immediately fell silent. "How can you threaten other people's children?" An elderly female passenger raised her voice. "You better ask why their parents don't educate them." Arthur and Alina jumped out into the street, unwilling to listen to the moralizing. Peter exhaled with relief. "All right." The driver asked him. "Yeah, fine," Peter replied softly. "Thank you very much. They're always picking on me." "Then get in the front seat. We'll chat." The man waved at him, returning to his seat. "What's your name?" "I'm Peter." "Michaels," the man replied without a backward glance. "Michaels. What's your mom's name?" The driver's voice changed. "Emily, do you know her?" Peter didn't notice that the bus driver had gone silent due to his attempts to suppress unsolicited tears. After all, he didn't just know Peter's mother, he was his own father. Lion had been leading the life of an ordinary man for several years now, but not because all his funds had been frozen by the police. The reason was different. The birth of his son had changed him. He clearly realized that Andrew would be a better father to the boy than he, and his final act of revenge was the firm that the former friends had started together many years ago. In that moment, after learning that he almost took Andrew and Jessica's lives with his own hands, Ryan realized how low he'd sunk. He was scared of himself. He was now a lying, vindictive, selfish father. Could such a man be responsible for someone? Be a role model? Ryan was shocked to meet his son because he wanted to lay low and never be seen by him. Let Peter grow up with loving parents who could give him a good upbringing. But now Ryan realized that he had seen Peter before, that the boy was always coming home by this route. "Uncle, are you all right?" inquired the kid when it was his turn to get off. He put the map to the machine and looked at the adult carefully. "Yeah, kid, don't worry. My allergies are acting up. That's what the tears are about. Take care of yourself. Don't let yourself get hurt." Ryan dared to ruffle his son's hair. In that moment, he experienced such tender feelings as he had never experienced before. Peter walked off the bus with a smile, leaving a completely lost Ryan behind. No more bullies harassed Peter on the bus. They had picked on him less often at school, choosing a new harmless target for their constant bullying. Now Peter came home from school in high spirits. He really liked the driver he had befriended. Upon entering the bus, the boy would immediately stop beside Ryan. They had a soft conversation. "You have very nice drawings. Your winning the contest is well deserved." He praised his son. "I used to love to draw when I was a kid too. It's been a long time since I tried it. It's a lot of fun." Peter nodded with a smile. "Starting next year, I'm also going swimming." The friendship between Peter and Ryan had taken on a life of its own. His father enjoyed every second he spent with his son and was glad no one teased him anymore. Peter complained to him about why he was being picked on. "Mom says it's nasty," Peter said candidly. "My dad pulled a man out of a fire. Can you imagine? He didn't wait for the fire department. He went into the flames himself. That's why he's scarred." Ryan was pained to hear that Peter and his family had suffered because of his terrible act. He often wanted to repent to his son, to tell him that it had ruined his dad and mom's lives for years, but he couldn't take it out on a child. And if he confessed, Peter would hate him and they would never see each other again. "So you made friends with the bus driver?" Emily inquired of her son. "Yeah, he's really nice." Standing up for me in front of Arthur and Elijah, Peter happily shared. I'll show him to you now. He reached into the phone's gallery. I took a video of him driving the bus. Emily ached and nearly let go of her son's phone. She could clearly see her ex-husband. Panic gripped her. Ryan had gotten close to Peter. God knows what he was up to. Jesus, son, she shrieked. Honey, what are you doing? Andrew peered over her shoulder and froze. Peter, is this your friend? Yes, the son said wearily. He didn't understand why Dad and Mom were so tense. Let's go to the police. Now, Emily said in her husband's ear. I'm not going to let him anywhere near here. He's definitely up to something. Andrew nodded excitedly. The police worked swiftly and arrested Ryan. His meeting with Andrew and Emily that same evening took place in the hallway of the squad room. Forget about Peter. You'll never see him again, asshole. Andrew grabbed him by his jacket and shook him. I admit everything. Just let us communicate, Ryan pleaded. The couple glanced over, and their mutual enemy visibly changed. His appearance spoke eloquently of the crime he had committed. Peter is the only good thing I have left. I'm happy he's mine, as long as he wants to communicate with you himself, Emily said firmly. Even though she and Andrew hated Ryan with all their hearts, they weren't going to lie to Peter because he had already grown attached to his own father. Ryan's trial was months away, as the lawyer had to work hard to build a defense for several violent crimes at once. Peter sauntered into the courtroom with his parents. Are you sure? Emily worried. She and Andrew had agreed that they wouldn't turn their son against Ryan. He'd be spending at least 20 years behind bars anyway. Yes, Ryan's uncle will be charged, but he's got to have at least one family member. As expected, Ryan was sentenced to 17 years. Andrew felt the sentence was too short to cover the atrocities he had calculatedly committed. Peter cried when Ryan looked at him after the verdict was announced. The man waved at his son but couldn't portray a carefree smile. Don't be afraid, son. Emily cradled him to her side and stroked his cheek. You'll be able to write him letters. Maybe I'll see you when you're older too, Andrew whispered. The couple knew Peter distinguished between bad and good deeds, and didn't want to shame him for wanting to keep in touch with his birth father. After the trial, Ryan's account was frozen, and the money belonging to Andrew and Emily returned to the family. They were back in control of their income. Well, we can finally let you have your surgeries. Emily rushed over to her spouse and kissed him. Oh my God, won't I ever feel those looks again? Andrew exhaled, still unable to believe his happiness. It took a few treatments to make his face and body look almost the same as before. You look different. Emily eyed her husband curiously. You have a new spouse now. The man laughed and hugged her. Daddy, and I love you. Love you, Peter added and joined his parents' hug. It doesn't matter to me at all. They are from the business world. After almost 8 years, the couple realized they could no longer keep up and decided to invest in new business, to do business for their own pleasure. They weren't chasing any heights. Emily, why don't we go into furniture? My father made everything with his own hands. I used to help him in the workshop a lot, and I was pretty good at it. Before Ryan and I started the business, I even worked in a furniture factory and learned a few things. And then maybe we'll start our own company. We'll make exclusive custom furniture. No, that's an interesting idea. Emily nodded. We just need to do a little more research and try it out. As long as we haven't invested anywhere, we can do different things and make up our minds. The couple decided to stop on furniture production, rented a room, bought equipment they learned themselves, and hired experienced craftsmen. Social networks did their job. And soon Emily and Andrew took orders from the first customers. Reviews about their developing enterprise left flattering. Orders began to arrive regularly. I've been thinking of a few ways to attract customers. I think we deserve a vacation, Emily once said, collapsing on the living room couch. Me too, Peter shouted, plopping down next to his mom. I got straight A's. Well, then I'll have to take my workers to the sea, Andrew laughed. I didn't do anything myself. The family went on vacation together with Jessica's family. The company stayed in luxurious rooms, and in the evening they lounged on the beach in the cool seawater. They went on excursions, tried out sea attractions, and even dived with scuba diving. Good boy. So talented and hardworking, Emily smiled at her friend. Yes, I married well, Jessica laughed. I used to scrub floors in the office. Now I can afford a vacation at a resort like this. week of vacation, which both families enjoyed, added to their strength and brought some surprises. Emily felt sick in the workshop when one of the craftsmen was heating up lunch in the microwave. Oh my God, what was that horrible smell? Emily clamped her hands over her mouth, realizing she was going to vomit. Emily, are you all right? Sarah, the foreman, who was waiting for her by the restroom, approached her. I don't know what to say, Emily said, and rushed back into the stall. When she came back a couple minutes later, she said, I remember how my first pregnancy started. I guess this is it. Well, congratulations. Sarah brightened up, hugging her gently. Thank you. But we have to be sure. Just please don't tell anyone. I want Andrew to be the first to know. Well, almost first. Emily said quietly to her husband after hearing the exciting news. He looked at her with delight. Are you clever, girl? He leaned down to her tummy and kissed through her shirt. Andrew, I'm almost 40. Do you think we can make it? Emily asked fearfully. We will, my dear, we will. He hugged her gently, feeling like the happiest man in the world. The massive door of the restaurant swung open from the inside. A man, scowling like a thundercloud, rushed out into the street. He was dragging a young woman behind him. Their gloomy faces betrayed their spoiled moods. That's it. I'm not coming here again, he loudly exclaimed. This used to be one of the best restaurants, and now it's a diner. The food is tasteless, the service is disgusting, and there's a pole in the middle of the room. They've turned a decent place into hell. The disgruntled man helped his companion into the premium luxury car, got behind the wheel, and pressed the gas pedal. I swear I'll never come back here again. Lister restaurant manager Jack, a lanky guy of about 25, looked puzzled as the couple drove away. They'd lost almost all of their regular customers in the last 2 months since the new owner had taken over the inept management of the place. It's all gone wrong. The attempt to establish a completely new order was crowned with the loss of the most valuable employees, including the face of the institution, an experienced chef, a virtuoso of his work, John Peterson. Even such a devastating effect of unprofessional intervention did not embarrass the boss, but on the contrary inspired further reshuffles and changes. The lover of party life decided to turn a well-known status restaurant into a fun club. After that, the institution fell apart completely, cardinally changed the audience. Revenues fell, as a result of which the salaries of employees were cut, and everyone slowly began to scatter in different directions. Former employees found themselves in demand in other restaurants. They were replaced by people with questionable appearance and reputation. In fact, only Jack and the junior cook Alex, who was now heroically carrying the whole kitchen, were left from the former staff. The guy turned around and with a sigh headed for the director's office. Something had to be decided immediately. It couldn't go on like this. Mike, a young guy, almost the same age as the administrator, sat sprawled in a leather armchair with his feet up on a desk littered with papers he'd been trying in vain to make sense of for weeks, and was frankly fooling around, throwing paper balls into the wastebasket. All these piles of documentation with figures, tables, and abstruse terms were boring him to death. A few months ago, suddenly widowed, Mike had hoped his late wife's restaurant would help him improve his own finances, but the establishment had only added to his problems and headaches. How on earth did his wife Sarah manage this complex machine? Previously, it seemed to Mike that the director's task is only to appear occasionally at work, reminding his menacing appearance to the employees who is the boss of the house, and to withdraw the proceeds. In fact, it turned out to be not so simple. Restaurant business has its own peculiarities and specifics. It is necessary to enter and understand all the intricacies of the case, to keep in tone labor team, to build suppliers, to follow the novelties of the field. A good restaurant cannot afford to go with the flow. Otherwise, it is bound to drown. You need constant changes, menu, dishes, interior, entertainment program. To the young widower, it all seemed boring and uninteresting. Only now he realized what a heavy burden his late wife was carrying. Mike stopped what he was doing, frowned and thought, staring at the ceiling. He remembered the day Sarah had driven her car off a bridge and died. The body, though, had never been found, but in this place of the river was a very fast current, and the investigator did not even doubt the outcome of the terrible accident. The wife had no relatives left. Her father died before their marriage, having had time only to bless the young, and they were married for only a year and a half. Most of their married life was spent in silent misunderstandings and quarrels. In recent months, their relationship has broken down completely. His wife got bogged down in work and did not want to delve into the peculiarities of the easy and free-spirited nature of his chosen one. He hoped that she supported his desire to have fun and enjoy life to the maximum. As he urged her to drop everything and go abroad to the warm sea, where all day long you can sit with a cocktail in a chaise lounge under a palm tree and do not think about anything, Sarah firmly stated that she intends to continue the work of his late father and inherited from him in the inheritance of bank accounts should work for the future, not for living life right now, suppressing his impulses and desires first to please his late father-in-law, then to avoid scaring off his conservative wife. The young man no longer wanted to live by the rules of this family of workaholics. Mike sincerely did not understand why they should work, if the money is there and the account comes steadily. As soon as his wife started talking about the fact that it would be good for him to do something, he blew his mind. Clubs, parties, hangouts, bright girls, unencumbered by moral standards. The wild nightlife surrounded him in its chaotic, violent dance. Until one day Sarah, in the midst of fun, did not pull him out of another club, tearing him away from a half-naked girl, put him in his car and said it in a tone that does not tolerate objection. "That's it. I've had enough. I'm filing for divorce tomorrow." Mike, leaning back in his seat, smiled mockingly and asked, "Go ahead, honey. File. How will we divide Daddy's inheritance?" Already decided, the young woman looked at him with an annihilating gaze and said in a calm tone, "No, dear. You are as you were with an empty purse, and you will remain so. You deserve nothing in law or in justice. Do you want to lead such a dissolute life? Be my guest, but now without my money." At that moment, Mike realized for the first time that she was right. Without her, he would have nothing to live on. This thought made the man instantly sobered up and immediately found the words to repent. With a pleading look in his eyes, he asked Sarah to think for a while, not to do any rash. For some time the man sat at home, pretending to have come to his senses, and even began to consult with his wife about his future work. Sarah looked at her husband incredulously, but did not speak aloud about the divorce. With pleasure supported his desire to do something useful. And then tragedy struck. At the moment when the police officers on the phone told Mike the terrible news, he was seized by contradictory feelings. Somewhere in the back of his mind he was relieved. Now there was no one to pressure him and control his life. From now on, he was his own master, and after inheritance rights, a rich widower. Justifying his behavior by trying to drown his sorrow, he returned to his former dissolute life. In the club, Mike met a pretty girl, Emily, with whom he once tried to get acquainted back in that debauch period, until he was not nailed by his wife. Emily herself didn't want to date a married man. The guy felt that she was not as simple as it seemed at first glance. He had to make a lot of effort to find out about her. The girl turned out to be the daughter of a local high-ranking official. And then Mike lit up with the idea of getting a wife even more favorable party than the previous one. He literally out of his skin to charm the new chosen one and make a positive impression on the future father-in-law with huge connections and almost unlimited opportunities. From now on, he had no right to make a mistake. Mike put on the image of a successful businessman, an orphaned widower in need of warm family relations. The calculation was correct, and his entrepreneurial spirit was rewarded. Emily gladly took on the role of savior of the unfortunate guy and soon agreed to marry him. But then, as luck would have it, the fine-tuned mechanism of the restaurant began to fail. Even, it would seem, a brilliant idea with the club did not give the expected effect. Everything turned out exactly the opposite. What the hell is this? Money is needed now more than ever. But I don't have long to wait. Wedding's in a month and a half. And I couldn't arouse my father-in-law's suspicion. It is necessary to keep and maintain the image of a serious groom without problems. There was a timid knock on the door, and the receptionist came in. On his face, he looked dejected and depressed. Mike Sergeyevich, I can't go on like this. That's it, I'm quitting, he said in a distressed voice right from the threshold. The owner took his feet off the table and sat down, as befitted a director. It is impossible to let go an employee who is ready to work for pennies. He couldn't do it on his own, and he wasn't likely to find another. What's the matter, Jack? What's the matter? Mike asked with a look of extreme concern on his face. The customers are leaving one by one, he complained. They don't like the new format of the place. They're complaining about the kitchen, and there's only Alex left. He can't do it alone. Mike did not want to be distracted from his dreams of a future cloudless life and deal with this, but the position required it. He had to at least pretend to keep things from falling apart. Well, what is to be done? You tell me, he said. The administrator scratched his head and hesitantly began. The salary would be added. That's a no right away, the owner frowned, when the club is promoted. Then I promise bonuses and bonuses to everyone. Well then, at least a taster for the cook and an assistant. Alex has gone completely off the deep end. He should gain experience. He's emotional, vulnerable. If necessary, he tries, but he'll have to switch to frozen convenience foods. Where am I going to get these workers for you now? The director asked in a disgruntled tone. He sighed heavily and thought. No, he couldn't ruin the kitchen, because he had bragged so much to his future father-in-law about his successful restaurant that he had allowed him to celebrate his wedding here. Another idea popped into Mike's head. Let's go. He waved his hand at the receptionist and rushed out of the office to the exit directly onto the street. There the director looked around as a pity there were practically no passers-by. The man resolutely approached a couple of girls passing by. Hello, would you like to work at the restaurant? They looked at him suspiciously in silence and hurried away. But Mike was already on a spree when he noticed a woman sitting nearby on a bench, tangled in rags. Johnson shouted to her, "Oh, beautiful. Come here." The receptionist rounded his eyes in horror and whispered in a low whisper, "Mike Peterson, you gotta be kidding me." But he was already on a roll. He loved jokes and spontaneous antics. Not at all. Here's a chef's assistant and a taster all rolled into one, and all for one salary, thought the director and asked the woman who came up, "Will you go to work in the restaurant?" Immediately a new plan instantly matured in his mind. He could capitalize on it and add bonuses in the eyes of his fiancé and future father-in-law on the back of helping the underprivileged. Emily was just as obsessed with the subject of charity. "I'll go." The hobo suddenly agreed, and the receptionist immediately rolled his eyes, not hiding his displeasure. Indoors, Johnson removed her tattered old shawl and outer garments, and before them stood a young girl almost the same age as them, with a short haircut and a rather neat appearance. Her hands were surprisingly clean, and there was no unpleasant odor. The only thing that immediately caught the eye was a rather large belly. The young woman was obviously pregnant. Lerecker immediately laughed. "Wow, I wanted to take one employee, but it turned out to be two. What luck." The girl said nothing. She just looked down at him. Cook Alex, a tall guy with glasses, looked at his new subordinate with a sigh, but there was nothing to do. There was a lot of work ahead of her. Maybe there was something she could do to help. "Good afternoon. My name is Alex. I'm the cook here," he introduced himself kindly. "And I'm Alina," the girl replied quietly, looking furtively at the giant in the chef's outfit. But they did not manage to get acquainted. "2 or 2 Caesars," shouted the waiter from the threshold, proclaiming the request from the customers. Alex immediately fussed, pulling preparations from the refrigerator with his chaotic and awkward movements. He was confusing himself, grabbing one thing and another. He dropped the food on the floor, took new ones out of the refrigerator, and eventually got lost and forgot what he had done before. Alina, at first silently, watched his torment, then carefully gathered her hair into a bundle, washed her hands thoroughly, and began to quickly chop the ingredients for the dishes. The cook was about to resent the arbitrary interference in the cooking process, but suddenly realized that she was doing everything right, and this help was making his job much easier. "Thank you," he muttered. "Fry the meat in the pan." The girl waitress in the arms of the bartender padded into the kitchen. They were laughing loudly at some joke, oblivious to the fact that the few customers could hear them. The prestige of the place was clearly not taken care of here. When they saw the novelty, they looked at each other and laughed even louder. The red-haired merrymaker threw tears, choking with laughter, wheezed. "I thought Jack was joking, and here it is. That's hilarious." "Yeah, our principal's being weird again." The waitress backed him up from somewhere. "Ernie, what dump?" The employee didn't have enough money for new clothes, but she was proud. Ignoring the rude couple, she began peeling vegetables. Not a muscle in her face quivered under the barrage of their stupid jokes. They mocked a little more, but without any response. They lost interest, quieted down, and went back into... Alex looked pityingly at his assistant and berated himself for not finding the right words and not standing up for, "Don't mind them. They do that to everyone." He tried to smooth things over. "I was bullied, too. They still call me a seal." Alina turned around and smiled sweetly. "I don't mind," she replied calmly. "And why do you allow yourself to be called that? You are a chef, after all." "So what kind of chef am I?" exclaimed the boy in a hearty voice. His chubby cheeks flashed a blush and made him look like a huge bun. Always getting out of hand, stretchy. A real one, he scolded himself. The main thing at home, such masterpieces turn out. Even on the Michelin star application apply. He continued to argue. But at work, it's just a vicious circle. Everything is somehow sloppy and... For the first time in many years, he was able to speak out. For some reason, this unfamiliar girl aroused confidence in him. He felt better at once. Such a passionate, sincere tirade touched Alina. Wanted to calm this complex, but clearly a good guy, and help at least with advice. "You're just nervous and not organizing your process correctly," she explained. "You just relax and realize you're the creator here. It's up to you to keep customers coming back to this establishment." The girl looked with a smile at the guy who was listening to her with his mouth ajar, and suddenly went to the door leading to the hall, summoning the cook from there. "Look," she spoke in a low voice, pointing to a couple seated by the window. "There's that fellow and girl you're cooking for just now. There he is taking his companion by the arm and is saying something to her. Somehow I think they are words of love. Aren't they, sweethearts?" she asked, looking back at Alex. "These are your guests. They could have walked into the hamburger place, knowing it's right around the corner. Or they could have just stayed home and ordered pizza. But they came to visit you. Alex, you want to give them a gastronomic treat and put them in the mood to remember this beautiful evening for a long time." The guy, dumbfounded, scrutinized the couple still waiting to order. It was the first time he had looked at his work from this angle. Alina, meanwhile, nodded at the finished dish waiting to be served and offered. "Alex, imagine that you are an artist creating a brilliant canvas, and I'll serve you the brushes and mix the paints." The cook liked metaphor. He was suddenly transformed. The stiffness and constant tension disappeared. His body relaxed, and there was a gleam of creative inspiration in his eyes. With quick and precise movements, he assembled an incredibly appetizing salad, and fantastically decorated plates with meat. For a period of time and space ceased to exist for him. Alina involuntarily admired the spiritualized expression of his face. After the waiter, having raised his eyebrows in surprise, took the finished masterpieces to the customers with unusual care, Alex twice ran to the door of the hall to observe the reaction of his guests to the dish in which he had put all his soul, and each time he returned to his workplace satisfied and happy. Now he wasn't afraid of any new order. The fear of screwing up and ruining everything suddenly and without a trace disappeared. The guy was overwhelmed with an irresistible desire to create and share his creative energy with people. The whole evening satisfied waiters, who had received generous tips today, respectfully looked at the cook and passed him words of gratitude from customers. From that day on, Alex didn't have to bear his cross any longer. He flew to work on the wings of inspiration, where a fragile girl with a huge heart and an invariably gentle smile was waiting for him at the entrance. The new girl with her balanced and malleable character imperceptibly and easily joined the team. Her appearance in the restaurant unexpectedly affected the whole atmosphere of the place. Between Alex and Emily established a friendly relationship. One day he dared to tell the girl a sad story from his childhood, which left an imprint on the formation of his character. When he was 11, his father left them and went to another family where he soon had another son. The impressionable Alex got it into his head then that he was the one who was not good enough, since his father had chosen another child. He lived with this bitterness in his soul for several years. Hence, apparently, came the insecurity and low self-esteem. I don't remember my father at all. All my life with my mother lived alone, Emily suddenly confessed. A quiet sadness lurked in her eyes. The young man bit his lower lip nervously and dared to ask the question that had long embarrassed him. "How did you end up on the street?" Emily flinched and looked away. Then she realized, "Oh, why am I rambling on? I have a lot of things to do." Alex realized that the girl was intentionally avoiding the question. The guy didn't insist. Probably. It was a very painful topic for her, just like pregnancy. She'd probably tell him if she wanted to. The appearance in the kitchen of this mysterious assistant had a surprising effect on the young cook. The acquired inner harmony and confidence in his own abilities were transferred from him and the world around him. Now the staff and customers perceived Alex in a completely different way, but the guy knew who to thank for such dramatic changes in his life. Sneaking glances at the calm, concentrated profile of his assistant, he more than once caught himself thinking that he was admiring her as if mesmerized. He was not embarrassed by the young woman's shabby clothes. Her presence somehow excited him in a special way. Even her belly did not spoil the impression. She was as beautiful as a Madonna. More and more often, their silent, meaningful glances crossed. An exhilarating, spring-like mood was in the air. Mike alone was not happy with the positive changes in the restaurant. This strange young woman, whom he himself had invited to work, was now causing him wild irritation. Just today, the manager slid a disgruntled glance at the formerly homeless woman who was peacefully chopping greens. "What are you digging around for?" he shouted at her. "There's a wet floor by the sink. Go wipe it down. Or else you'll come back and I'll be responsible for you later," he muttered. The girl immediately obediently took a rag and wiped up the water drops. This silent submissiveness pissed off the young director even more. It was as if she kept getting under his skin on purpose. Mike couldn't help himself from jabbing her in some way as he passed by. The gesture of charity from hiring a homeless woman had no effect, except that good-hearted Emily sincerely admired his noble deed. And so it would be unwise to get rid of the irritant now. He did not like this Emily. He himself could not explain this sudden dislike. Though no, there was one reason. That pregnant Johnson reminded the guy of his dead wife, either in her looks or her movements. He even more than once caught himself thinking that he deliberately mocked and humiliated the new girl, or rather, not even her, but Sarah in her face, wanting revenge for the time when he was forced to submit to his wife and live by her rules. This Emily is certainly doing a good job, and the cook is now praised by her customers. But this similarity of hers brought back unpleasant memories, unsettled and infuriating. But nothing would survive the wedding, get rid of this yoke with all the neighbors, carts and pancakes, sell the restaurant, and forget as a terrible dream. No, he was born for something else and deserves better. Thinking about the prospects after the marriage made Mike smile. The future father-in-law secretly confessed that he was preparing a surprise for the young people, a big wedding trip abroad. That's where the lawfully wedded husband would work Emily over, convince her to do what he failed to do with Sarah. The new wife is different. She has a soft, malleable personality. Do whatever you want. They'll live abroad, and Daddy will do anything for his beloved daughter. And finally, his dream will come true. Lisa went out of the kitchen into the corridor, and again noticed a strange man with cold eyes and a sports bag in his hand. His piercing stare made her chest throb every time she saw him. He came to the principal's office about twice a week, but no one knew who this visitor was. "I have no idea," Alex answered her question indifferently. "Maybe it's about the wedding? It's none of our business." Lisa disagreed with him. It was unlikely that a man with such an intimidating appearance could be in the business of organizing celebrations. Something was amiss here. And so the wedding day arrived. Mike didn't skimp to impress the future in-laws. That's something he knew how to do. Hired a designer to decorate the venue, 3 more chefs for the evening. The last money went to the host, live music and a huge cake with ornate decoration. Everything was going great. The bride was happily clinging to the groom. The father-in-law, with a shot glass in his hand, was making his 3rd toast, looking favorably at the young. And the guests were noisily having fun, happy to create another family and the occasion to eat and drink. At the moment when the talkative host announced, finally, a short break, Lisa suddenly appeared in the hall. Everyone was busy chatting among themselves. No one paid attention until she stepped up on stage and took the microphone in her hands. "Dear guests, I have an announcement to make," the young woman proclaimed in a calm voice. Mike was even taken aback by such insolence, blushed thickly and growled menacing. "What are you doing up there? You're supposed to be in the kitchen. Get back in there now." "Come on, let her talk," Emily stopped him. "Maybe she's got a congratulatory message from the staff. Let her say it." His father-in-law supported his daughter in the same tone. And Mike bit his lip. To go to the conflict on such a day was unnecessary. And the girl from the stage continued. "Thank you. You're wonderful people. I'm sorry, Emily, that you decided to tie your fate to such a scoundrel as Mike, who ruined his wife's business and now sells here something forbidden in bags." "What?" The groom jumped up from his seat, looking back at his father-in-law fearfully. "What are you babbling about, you fool?" "I'd also like, Mike, to say hello to you from the other side of the world." And she pointed her hand at a female figure that had just appeared in the semi-darkness, as if from nowhere. And Mike, as if mesmerized, watched her approach until she came into the lighted place. "Hello, Mike." It was Sarah, alive and well. She stood in the middle of the hall just as he had last seen her, as if she hadn't disappeared for months. The guy's legs gave out, and he collapsed heavily into a chair. How was that possible? All the guests froze, not realizing what was happening. The bride was also confused by surprise and couldn't utter a word. The general silence was broken by the groom's unusually husky voice. "You," was all he managed to utter. "I am," Sarah grinned. "And you weren't hoping to see me after you deliberately damaged the brakes on the car?" "That still needs to be proven," he muffled in response. "Of course," she said calmly, and looked away. Plainclothes police officers entered the room and twisted the groom's arms. The guests woke up, their excited murmurs traveling through the hall. Some woman shrieked fearfully. The bride and her father jumped toward them, trying to make sense of the situation. "What's going on here? Can someone explain it to me?" nervously shouted the high-ranking father-in-law, spreading his hands in confusion. Just then, an investigator walked in with a confident stride and handed Mike an arrest and search warrant. "You are charged with attempted murder and possession and distribution of a controlled substance in a particularly large amount." Sarah just stood there and watched the whole action aloofly, not realizing how she had gotten to this point. She thought back to where it had all started. For as long as she could remember, it had been just the two of them living with her dad. Her father was an interesting, prominent man and wealthy. He had a lot of women hanging all over him. He had the occasional brief fling, but he never brought anyone home and never formally introduced his daughter. He lived by his own principles and rules and did not tolerate anyone telling him what to do. He told about his mother sparingly and reluctantly. She had long ago died suddenly. For the sake of his daughter, he was ready to do anything. Sarah studied in the best school, was an excellent student and activist. From the first grade was at the same desk with a modest boy Nick, who until graduation carried her briefcase and threw admiring glances in her direction, although never once admitted to sympathy during her school years. The girl got used to seeing her neighbor as a loyal friend. It did not even occur to her what strong emotions raged in his soul. Only after graduation, escorting Sarah to a foreign university, which sent her father to learn the features of modern economics, Nick, timidly stammering, confessed his love. Sarah was a little surprised, smiled and hugged the guy in a friendly way, letting him know how she felt about him. Both of them felt awkward, and since then they practically didn't talk to each other. Studying abroad was easy for the girl, but nostalgia for her native home did not let go. She missed her father terribly. She was ready to break away and leave at any minute. That's when she and her father had their real fight. This was the first and last time in her life, when Sarah decided to return home after graduation, against his wishes. She couldn't stay there anymore. She didn't like it. The air wasn't the same, the people were strange. Her father wanted her to live in a country with a developed economy. He thought it would be better for her, but Sarah didn't want her fate to be decided for her. She came, put her international diploma on her father's table, and firmly declared that she wanted to live here, next to him. After such an adult and clear declaration of intentions, the man's heart finally calmed down when his daughter agreed to head his pride, the best restaurant in the city. It was during that period, as it seemed then quite by chance, that Sarah met Mike. Tall, blonde guy shone with manners and tried in every possible way to charm the chosen one. He never left her side. Now she realized that she didn't know Mike either before or after the wedding. The cunning fellow had changed his coloring to the right one in an effort to please. It hadn't alarmed her at the time. It amazed her how much they had in common. Interests, music, books, movies. Coincidences like that don't just happen, she thought. This meeting was no coincidence. Mike was the one for life. By that time, her father was already very ill and did not hide his desire to find his daughter a worthy party, so as not to worry about her future. Mike managed to brainwash him too. Giving his consent to the marriage, the man immediately, as if relaxed and stopped fighting for life. It wasn't long before his soul was gone for good. With Daddy's death, his daughter's world turned upside down. Sarah was so used to him always being around. You can at any time come or call, to share joy or, conversely, to cry. Just to hear his dear, loving voice, Dad always had time to talk to his daughter. After waiting a few months, the groom began to persuade Sarah to formalize the relationship. Mole, this is the last will of the father. The girl agreed, and they just quietly signed, without celebrations and festive fuss. Sarah went to work. She wanted, in memory of her beloved father, to make even better his child, in which he put his whole soul. She thought about opening 2 more such restaurants. In her dreams, she always saw her husband as a reliable support, not once asked him to join the family business. But Mike was changed after the wedding. Now he was living the high life. He spent his wife's money left and right, taking everything he could from life. I had heard about her husband having fun on the side. Sarah at first was hard to get over. then just angry at herself for having made a mistake in a man. And when the woman caught her spouse drunk in the smoke with some girls, decided to divorce, which immediately resolutely told him. The whole world finally crumbled into small pieces on the day when Sarah and his car went to a new supplier out of town. The memory of that unfortunate accident made her shudder. She only remembered depressing the brake pedal as she turned onto the bridge and feeling the pedal suddenly fall easily into the void. Sarah lost control, and the car sped down the steep slope toward the river. Her time slowed to a crawl. The girl looked with horror at the smoothly but inevitably approaching edge of the cliff. Fear squeezed her heart and stiffened her whole body, making it impossible to move. Well, that's it, flashed through the girl's mind. The strong blow of her chest and head against the steering wheel knocked her out for a moment from the sharp, piercing pain. She woke up already in the river. The cabin was rapidly filling with water. Sarah, unaware of her own actions, jerked the door open. At the last moment, she managed to slip out of the car, which immediately went down. The current swept up the unfortunate young woman. Panic, terror, and fear of following the car into the dark abyss made her struggle. With her last strength, she tried to stay afloat, paddling, and paddling. The next thing she knew, her mind was a blur. There's no telling how long she was adrift. She only came to her senses when someone shook her violently by the shoulder, trying to bring her to her senses. Chills ran through her entire body. It was wet and cold. Sarah groaned. Her voice came out weak and hoarse. When she opened her eyes, she saw a young girl's face that looked familiar. When she looked around, she realized she was lying on the riverbank in wet clothes, covered in silt. Apparently, she had just been pulled out of the water. "How you feeling?" the stranger asked, and leaned over her concernedly, peering into her eyes. "Terrible," Sarah whispered with naughty lips. She was indeed experiencing an excruciating headache. It also felt like everything was fractured, especially in her chest. On top of that, she was shaking with chills. It became unbearably cold. "My name is Lisa, and you are?" The girl introduced herself. "Sarah," she replied in a weak voice, and then suddenly asked, "Have we never met before?" "What happened to you? Can you walk?" But noticing that the rescued girl was feverish, she ran for help. In just a couple of minutes, she brought a neighbor, a big man with stubble on his broad face, who picked up Sarah in his arms, as if she was a flake, and carried her straight to a small house nearby. Lisa took off her wet clothes and laid her on an ancient metal bed with a huge, lush feather bed, and covered her with 2 down comforters. Sarah watched her savior through half-closed eyelids and could not remember where she had seen her. Lisa was thinking the same thing at the same time. A strange sense of déjà vu had seized her at the first sight of the unfortunate girl's pale face and hadn't let go until now. Walking past the large mirror hanging on the wall, she suddenly stopped and looked at her reflection. Suddenly an epiphany came. Of course, that's where this incomprehensible feeling came from. It was just that this Sarah was strangely similar to herself, to Lee. Once in bed, the rescued woman seemed that she fell into a warm, thick cloud, carefully embraced her soft, fluffy edges. It became warm and cozy. The pain dulled. Her eyes closed on their own, drawing her into a heavy, restless sleep, where she was again endlessly falling, sinking, and floating. The Trofana conversation was heard through the dream. "Mitrofanovna, won't she die? Shall we call a doctor after all?" A familiar voice asked anxiously. But that would have caused resentment. Who else? "Why did you call then?" "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to offend. I'm worried about her. She's very pale. She's been feverish for the last hour." Sarah opened her eyelids with difficulty, and through the fog noticed that it was late evening outside the window. Mrs. Adams appeared to be a small, gaunt, old woman, clean and neat, wearing a white shawl, as if she had just returned from a church service. She must have been the local witch doctor. Sarah didn't trust alternative medicine, but she liked his grandmother. There was an inexplicable, pleasant aroma coming from her, something between the smell of incense and a bouquet of wildflowers. The old woman ran her hands over Sarah's body, then felt her chest and head, causing a sharp pain. It's all clear here. Severe contusion to the chest and head. No fracture, I think. In the evening, I'll brew you some herbs to drink and apply these compresses. Don't worry, everything will pass very quickly. The healer was silent and then frowned and said, "Puzzles. There's more." She looked back at Lisa and commanded decisively, "Come here. Give me your hand." The girl stretched out her palm in surprise. The old woman clung to it with one hand and took Sarah's palm with the other. Suddenly she froze, looking at one point and muttering something under her nose. After sitting like that for about a minute, Sarah opened her mouth to call out to the witch. Why, maybe she fell asleep. Quietly, she's old. But Lisa rounded her eyes meaningfully and put her finger to her lips, indicating that she should keep quiet. The old woman finally came out of her trance and linked the girl's hands together. "Do you know you are sisters?" she suddenly asked. The girls looked dumbfounded at Mrs. Adams and then at each other. What do you mean?" came out of Sarah's mouth. The old woman shrugged. "I can see that you are sisters and separated at an early age. I'm never wrong. I was shown such a picture from there." "From there?" the stunned Sarah asked. "From there," the witch repeated carefully and pointed a slender finger upward. Everyone fell silent, digesting the information they had received. Then Sarah shook her head confidently and said firmly, "No, you just saw that we looked alike in some way. No, my father would have told me. That can't be true." "It can," Lisa, who had been watching the rescued girl breathlessly the whole time, suddenly said. Everyone stared at her, waiting for an explanation. But she was visibly nervous. Then, finally, having gathered her thoughts, told everything she knew. Lisa and her mother lived all their lives in this small house. Growing up, the daughter began to ask questions about her father, but the mother only waved away and kept repeating the same phrase. "Father so-and-so abandoned us and left." Her mother worked as a school teacher and gained a reputation as a strict woman. She treated both her students and Lisa equally harshly, giving no one a hard time. School children even did not hide their dislike of the overly principled teacher. The girl was offended to listen to all those epithets which they awarded her mother. She still loved her mother and knew for sure that she loved her too. It's just that she never tended to her and always demanded to the full. But Lisa believed that thanks to this she was good. When the girl graduated from school with a gold medal and followed in her mother's footsteps in the teacher training institute. True, thanks to a softer character of nature, she formed a completely different approach to children, for which she has repeatedly fallen from a more experienced mother. After listening to her arguments, Lisa stubbornly continued to bend her line, considering her own method more effective. Unfortunately, excessive straightforwardness and professional deformation served her mother badly. Once she went to the city and missed the train. She had to wait for the last one almost at night. Eyewitnesses said that the woman began to make harsh remarks to some drunken company at the They did not hesitate to beat her to a pulp. Lisa remembers well how she arrived at the hospital and entered her mother's room. She could not recognize her at first and then sobbed at her bedside for a long time. Her face was covered in bruises, her right arm and collarbone were broken. But most importantly, these scoundrels had managed to break the woman's spirit. They trampled her faith in light, good, faith in truth and humanity. The woman simply did not want to live any longer and felt that she did not have long to live. Before she died, she told about Lisa, about her father. The parents met very young and fell in love with each other at first sight. It was like a lightning strike. A bright, passionate romance ended in a quick wedding. Surrounding people could not understand how two people with such a stubborn temperament and explosive character decided to link their fates. Two representatives of the fiery element tried to get along together, and for a while they managed it. With the appearance of twins in the family, the young father seriously thought about the future. He had grandiose plans, but in a small village he did not see any prospects at all. Unfortunately, he could not persuade his wife to try her luck in the big city. She decided to stay to work in the local school. No arguments, persuasions, and ultimatums could not change her choice. Over time, the young couple completely ceased to understand each other. Each insisted on his own. More and more often they quarreled, and then defiantly remained silent for several days. A real scandal in the family broke out when 2-year-old girls accidentally poured ink into the drawer with documents in the desk. The parents, seeing that all passports, birth certificates, and notary papers were irrevocably spoiled, were horrified, but they reacted in different ways. The mother wanted to punish her daughters in her heart, but the father categorically opposed it, trying to prove that they were too young and did not understand anything, but the woman stubbornly insisted. In the heat of anger, she shouted that she was a certified teacher and she herself knows how to bring up children, that she would do without him in this matter. The conflict grew. Mutual reproaches from both sides were sprinkled. Unburied resentment spilled out. In fury, the wife threw her husband right in his face. "My children do not need such a father. What can you teach them, loser?" The man couldn't bear the hurtful words. "All right," he shouted. "Since that's the case, I'm taking one daughter and leaving. We'll see who raises the best." "Ah, so? Well, go away then. Do you think I'll cry? We'll live just fine without you," she shouted hysterically. Lan spoke in agreement. Her father took Sarah, who clearly favored her father, liked to spend time with him and sit on his lap. Lisa increasingly squirmed around her mother and, accordingly, stayed with her. This is such a silly principle of unbalanced and stubborn parents separated the sisters. Lisa could not believe what she heard from her mother, but also to bark and question her in such a difficult condition, she could not. For the first time in her life, the daughter saw in the eyes of the Iron Lady tears. Soon the mother was gone. The sorrow tore her heart to pieces, but the thought of her father and sister did not give rest. Lisa even tried to look for them, but the mother after the divorce left herself and her daughter her maiden name. She never had time to give her father's information. Sarah listened, holding her breath, and followed her sister without taking her eyes off. Her soul suddenly opened a secret door and let in the missing puzzle, which was immediately built into the empty space of the inner world. An epiphany had come at last. This was what had plagued her all her life. A sense of something missing, something long lost, something with which there was still a vague, invisible connection. Another soulmate. It's an incredible story. It just didn't make sense. The things their parents did when they were young. And for what? To prove something to each other. And what could they prove in the end? These heavy thoughts finally deprived the girl of strength, and she closed her eyes in exhaustion and fell on the pillow. Sarah was more concerned with other things now. She didn't even doubt that the accident had been arranged by her husband. It was not for nothing that he had said the day before that he had put his car in for service and had taken her car to go somewhere. He'd been tense all evening after his return. But what's next? How to prove it was his doing. To return home now was to expose herself to the danger of another assassination attempt. Anxious thoughts completely consumed her mind, and the girl herself did not realize when she fell asleep. Something heavy, but very warm and soft warmed Sarah's chest. Through her sleep, she reached out her hand to free herself from the heaviness, but fumbled with a large, hairy, living creature. Immediately frightened, she pulled it away and opened her eyes. Right in front of her face, she saw the cat's huge, shiny green eyes, nestled on her chest. The bright red-haired beauty looked at her with genuine surprise. "What on earth were you afraid of?" "It's me," Lisa's voice came from nearby. "Piggy, leave Sarah alone. You better go eat." The cat slowly got up and went to the kitchen with a sense of dignity, trustingly pressed against Sarah's side in farewell. A smiling Lisa entered the room, wiping her hands with a towel, and asked, "So how are you? Sorry the frosting didn't make it. But it's even good that you had it lying around. They say cats can heal." Sarah moved. Her head and chest had hurt less. Maybe it was the effect of the wine she'd drunk before bed. or maybe the merit of her new friend Marusi. In any case, the rescued woman with difficulty, but still was able to get out of bed on her. Lisa carefully supported the girl, took her to the bathroom, and then sat down in a comfortable chair in the kitchen, where her mother used to like to stay up late checking students' notebooks. The girl had already managed to fry puffed pancakes and make tea. Sitting across from each other, the girls ate breakfast. They didn't know how to start a conversation. Yesterday, they had never managed to talk, and today there was an awkward silence in the air. A cat came up and began to rub its fiery fur affectionately against one girl, then the other, as if to encourage them to start talking. They laughed, and then looking at each other and realizing that they were thinking of the same thing, they laughed heartily, and the conversation succeeded in getting started. The tense atmosphere was instantly diffused. "Marusia recognized you," Lisa said, gently looking Sari straight in the eyes. "Actually, she hides from strangers. So you're her own." The latter smiled and replied, "I'm really glad I have a sister." Now they looked curiously at each other's facial features, noticing with pleasure that they had much in common. New feelings, unavailable to them before, stirred their souls and encouraged them. The joy that they now had another family member who would not betray them, who would always support them, who simply existed. Sarah, in turn, told about her life and initiated her sister into suspicions about the intentions of her negligent husband. Lisa frowned and shook her head sadly. What a scoundrel, she then thought, and asked her sister what to do next. Is there any way we can follow him? A sign. Who would do that? He'd recognize me right away. Let me do it, Lisa suggested with burning eyes and continued, noticing the girl's incredulous look. Why? While school's on vacation, I'm free as the wind. I'll change into rags. I played Baba Yaga at the New Year's matinee. I'll play a bum. I can also make a pregnant belly out of a pillow to make it more natural. Sarah did not want to agree to such an adventure. She was afraid of putting her sister in danger. Time was running out. There was no other plan. After 3 weeks, Lisa finally managed to talk her into it. The raid went pretty well. The new Johnson was able to find out something about the restaurant's heir. After that, they devised a plan. Lisa would keep an inconspicuous eye on the restaurant under the guise of a vagrant, but with Mike's light hand, she suddenly got a chance to observe Sarah's husband from the inside. Returning late at night from her new job, her sister was happily recounting all the details of the day. But Sarah had a very different reaction to such news. "You're not going there again," she declared. "Why not? Everything is working out so wonderfully," gasped the sister. "Don't you understand? I don't know now what's in that man's head or what else he's capable of. I don't want anything to happen to you." I suddenly glistened in her eyes. Lisa hugged her sister and reassured her, "You're my darling. Everything will be all right. The main thing is that we are together now, having embraced." The girls sat for a long time, discussing further actions. Then Sarah suddenly remembered her school at Nick. One of her former classmates had once said that he worked as a police investigator. It all came together in her head. Someone who could really help. But all previous contacts were lost along with the phone drowned in the river. That's the reality of the modern world. Nobody trains their memory or memorizes phone numbers by heart like they used to. Sarah was still weak and she was not allowed to be in the city. But the sister managed to find a young investigator, Peterson. Nick surprisingly quickly to send greetings from a former classmate. It was impossible to tell from his facial expression whether he was happy to hear from his first love or not. But judging by the fact that he had rushed to the small village, many kilometers away from the city, that evening, he cared. "Nick, is that you?" The girl exclaimed, barely recognizing in the older, broad-shouldered man the same hesitant, skinny sigh that had walked her home from school. He smiled embarrassedly, stepping closer and taking Sarah's hand, looking into her bottomless eyes. He thought they had become even more amazing and alluring. The old love that had been buried deep in the depths of his vulnerable soul at a young age had awakened and, spreading its wings, burst free. Unlike Sarah, he never lost sight of his former classmate. All the last years he knew about her imminent marriage right after her return from abroad, and after the news of the death of a few months he did not let go of depression until the department did not show up as a messenger. Lisa, Nick and Sarah talked until the night. First they discussed the accident and the operation on the future resurrection of the girl, then just warmly remembered the carefree youth. Now the admiring look and warm, caring hand of the school sigh, gently squeezing her palm, was perceived by the girl quite differently. The extraordinary energy emanating from him enveloped her in a blanket of serenity and calmness. How stupid she had been before. She was looking for true love somewhere far away. She was falling for Mike's charismatic appearance and tongue-in-cheek, when a real loving man was always unobtrusively looming nearby, ready to help at any second. Nick conducted an examination of Sarah's car, which with difficulty managed to find 200 meters from the site of the fall. The suspicions were completely confirmed. The brake cylinder was deliberately damaged, which led to the failure of the braking system and the accident. Surviving as a spy, Lisa, for her part, quickly realized that everything is not so simple in the new club. The observant girl, to whom no one else paid attention, was able to find out that Mike, trying to replenish his wallet, got in touch with the drug mafia and began dealing in substances. She was even able to determine when there were deliveries of the goods. The dealer turned out to be that suspicious stranger. The last shipment was on the eve of the wedding. But Nick had to risk his career to conduct a detention at the wedding of a high-ranking official. But everything went exactly as planned. After the discovery in the director's office of a large batch of white powder, Mike confessed to everything. Instead of a spa vacation, he was now facing a long prison sentence. That's what happens when you start using the worst means in pursuit of a carefree life. The sisters couldn't stand it any longer and rushed towards each other in the street. They laughed through their tears and hugged each other. They hadn't seen each other for months, only calling each other all that time. First, Sarah and Nick went on vacation on their wedding trip. Then Lisa had gone to another city with Alex, who had been invited to participate in a television cooking show. Then work issues constantly distracted both sisters, and there was never time to meet. During this period, they missed each other so much that they agreed to live next door to each other. They vowed never to be apart again. As she hugged her sister, Sarah suddenly pointed to Lisa's small belly, visible from beneath her open coat. "Are you acting like someone else again?" Lisa laughed merrily and replied, "Now I'm impersonating a mommy-to-be. It's going to be twins, by the way. They said yesterday at the ultrasound." Sarah looked at her sister fondly. She leaned over and whispered softly in her ear, "Just don't ever separate them." Lisa smiled sadly, understanding her half-heartedly. She hadn't realized before what a miracle it was to have a sister. It's a special, inexplicable attitude. It is friendship and reliability and support and love. They can be characterized by only one all-encompassing and most valuable word: family. No matter what happens in life, sisters